Chapter 34. Han Shuo's group of 12 walked for a full 8 days as they headed south. The magical beasts they encountered along the way became stronger and stronger. There was a unicorn horned bull magical beast, a giant lizard magical beast, a magical wolf that could release wind blades, and an eagle that could spit out frost. The group had been able to deal with them calmly before, but after a day of danger, they could clearly feel the increasing pressure. In the beginning, everyone had been eating the food they had brought with them, but when they ran out of food, they would just cut up and roast the magical beasts they had hunted. These magical beasts were becoming more and more ferocious, but not all of their meat was delicious. For example, the lizard magical beast's meat had a strange odor and was hard to swallow. However, the more powerful a magical beast was, the more valuable the items on its body would be. Especially magical beasts that could release simple magic, their bodies would have magical beast cores. These magical beast cores were very precious, and depending on the level, they could be sold for a very high price. The group's gains were not ordinary. In the past few days, they had obtained a total of 4 magical beast cores, 3 from the Windblade Wolf, and 1 from the Frost Eagle. Magical beast cores were divided into 6 levels according to their level. Level 6 cores were the cheapest, and level 1 was the most valuable. It was very rare to see one. These magical beast cores could be made into some powerful magical weapons that could amplify the power of a mage's magic. There were also some that could increase a mage's mental strength, so they were very valuable. The Windblade Wolf core was a level 5 core, and the market price was about 20 gold coins. The Frost Eagle core was a level 4 core, and the market price was about 150 gold coins. Just based on the magical beast cores they had obtained, even after deducting the 50 gold coins needed to borrow the warhorses, they had already made a profit. Not to mention that apart from the cores, the flesh on these magical beasts was also valuable. The fur of the Windblade Wolf and the unicorn-horned bull's horn were all very valuable items. The value of all these items added together had far exceeded Fanny and Jean's expectations. After these few days of training, everyone has improved quite a bit. We are no longer so flustered when facing magical beasts. This is the most important thing in a real battle. Also, our luck isn't bad. This time, we've gained a lot from this training expedition. It's better than our previous harvests. When we return to the academy, we'll sell these things and distribute the gold coins to everyone. Fanny was in a good mood. Her dainty face carried a satisfied smile as she spoke to the students in a gentle voice. Along the way, Han Shuo had been coldly observing everything around him. Han Shuo had clearly seen how the inexperienced students had turned from panic to calmness in the face of the magical beast's training. Han Shuo's 5 senses had become clearer than everyone else's due to his cultivation of demonic arts. In the subsequent operation, Han Shuo's early warning also accounted for much of the credit. No one could figure out how Han Shuo had such sensitive 5 senses. Fanny had also carefully examined Han Shuo's body over the past few days, but had naturally come up empty-handed. Fanny was a bit dispirited and puzzled, but couldn't think of any good ideas. In the end, she could only say that when they returned to the academy, they would use some of the academy's magical equipment to give Han Shuo a detailed examination. The days of advance warning and the delicious cooking of roasted meat had caused Han Shuo's status to unwittingly rise a few notches in this training mission. Bach, Bella, and the others were still extremely unfriendly towards Han Shuo due to their bad luck of eating some food that was difficult to swallow. Some of the other students had already stopped bossing Han Shuo around. Some of the more picky students had even started trying to get along with Han Shuo in order to eat better food. Master Fanny, when can we get to the cemetery of death? Lisa immediately asked after hearing Fanny's words. Fanny's brow furrowed when she heard these words. She was silent for a moment, and then sighed softly. I've only heard that the cemetery of death has been discovered in the southern depths of the dark forest, but I'm not too sure where it is exactly. Actually, the main purpose of coming to the dark forest this time is for you to be able to properly cast your necromancy magic without panic in the face of danger. According to your current results, you've all basically met the requirements. I don't know where the cemetery of death is at all, but you should all feel that the magical creatures we've encountered are becoming stronger and stronger. If it wasn't for Brian's early warning, I think some of us would have been injured long ago. But even so, when we encountered the frost eagles yesterday, it was a close shave. If we continue to head south, I'm afraid that not only will some of us be injured, some of us might even die. So, I think it's time for us to return. The students were all a bit dazed when they heard Fanny's words. Jean nodded and said, Indeed, we're only here to train. We can't be sure of the cemetery of death, nor do we know if it really exists. It's normal that we didn't encounter it. Everyone has personally experienced the situation yesterday. If we go further south, I think everyone's lives will be in danger. We've already reaped great rewards from this expedition. There's no need for us to continue taking risks. Since the two teachers had spoken thus, some of the more cowardly students thought of the dangers of the past 2 days, and couldn't help but nod in agreement. They all said, All right, then let's return to the academy. The danger has been increasing lately. Bach, you're a coward. How can there be great rewards without danger? If it wasn't for the danger yesterday, how could we have obtained the Frost Eagle's core? We should continue heading south. Perhaps we'll be able to obtain even more valuable things. This way, when we return to the academy, the other majors won't dare look down on our necromancy major. Lisa glared disdainfully at Bach, who'd spoken up earlier, and raised her head to mock him. She then turned her head to look at Han Shuo, who was minding his own business as he roasted meat. She said, Brian, don't you agree? Han Shuo originally shouldn't be the center of attention, but because of Han Shuo's performance over the past few days, all the students actually looked at Han Shuo after hearing Lisa's words. Even Fanny and Jean did the same, as if Han Shuo's decision was very important. Han Shuo couldn't help but be speechless. After a moment of hesitation, he smiled honestly and said, Taking risks is a must. Since everyone isn't injured yet, why don't we walk a bit more? Who knows, maybe there'll be even more rewards. Fanny looked oddly at Han Shuo and actually nodded after a moment of silence. She said delicately, All right, since this is the case, then let's walk a bit more. We'll head back the way we came when someone is injured. Come, everyone can eat. Han Shuo laughed lightly and called out. Lisa, Fanny, and the others were the first to happily rush over and grab the 2 largest pieces of meat that Han Shuo had handed over without a care for their manners. Deep into the night, the cool moonlight shone upon the dark forest. Some students were already fast asleep in a few crude tents, while a few others held back their drowsiness and shouldered the heavy responsibility of keeping watch. Han Shuo left by himself amidst the silence and slowly distanced himself from the students' tents, moving stealthily in the shadows of the towering trees. Han Shuo's not-so-muscular body was as nimble and swift as a cheetah in the crevices of the tree's shade, weaving through the trees with extreme ease. Han Shuo was far away from Fanny and the others' tents in the blink of an eye, heading south. Han Shuo's body abruptly stopped, and he raised his hands, chanting the incantation for summoning skeletons. Fallen warriors of the dead, heed the Dark Herald's call and reveal your existence. As soon as the incantation was finished, a dark, thin, and small little skull suddenly appeared in the air, bone dagger in hand. The little skull's bones seemed to be even tighter and shinier now, completely blending in with the night like an elf in the dark. As Han Shuo moved quickly, the little skull's leg bones continuously bent and bounced, but no longer made soft creaking sounds. The 7 bone spurs on his back flapped, causing the little skull to seem as if he was gliding through the air, weaving through the dark forest side by side with Han Shuo. 2 Windblade wolves suddenly appeared in front of the man and skeleton. These 2 Windblade wolves were tearing at the corpse of a magical creature in the shape of a wild boar. One of the Windblade wolves seemed to sense movement as its pointy ears suddenly perked up and its green eyes darted left and right. A bone dagger glinted with a faint, sharp, cold light as it suddenly appeared in the night. The bone dagger drew a wondrous arc in the air and abruptly stabbed towards the Windblade wolf that had raised its head and was on guard. At the same time, an agile figure suddenly rushed out from the dark shadows of the trees and dashed towards the other Windblade Wolf at high speed. A faint purple light suddenly appeared in the dark night sky, appearing so beautiful and enchanting. Two mournful howls sounded out from the mouths of the two Windblade Wolves. The two savage and bloodthirsty Windblade Wolves were both killed before they could even react. One of the wolves died instantly after its skull was pierced through by the bone dagger, while the other fell to the ground stiffly, emitting a cold air continuously from its body. Heh, another 2 level 5 magical cores! Han Shuo smiled and muttered to himself after he withdrew his hand. On the other side, Little Skull had already started using the bone dagger to cut off the valuable fur of the Windblade Wolves. Judging from his practice movements, it was obvious that this wasn't his first time doing this. Chapter 35. During the past few nights, Han Shuo had been moving alone, using his keen senses to hunt down the magical creatures in the vicinity. One man and one skeleton, with their tacit cooperation, had become successful in hunting. So far, they had harvested a total of 4 level 5 magical beast crystal cores, along with some valuable furs and horns. Not only did Han Shuo try to deploy magical yuan in the process of hunting the magical creatures, but he also repeatedly practiced the bone spur magic that he mastered. Every time, he was able to combine long-range and close-range attacks with wondrous results. Han Shuo had never encountered the panic and nervousness that the students displayed when facing a magical creature for the first time. He was just as calm from beginning to end, even numb and callous. Even Han Shuo himself didn't know why he didn't have these negative emotions in the process. He could even vaguely feel that there was excitement and anticipation in the depths of his heart during the process of hunting the magical creatures, as if he was enjoying the process immensely. I'm not a good person after all, Han Shuo thought self-deprecatingly as he accepted the magical creature cores and the Windblade Wolf fur from the Little Skull's hands. He patted the Little Skull's glossy black skull and smiled. Let's go, we can go back now. The Little Skull grasped the bone dagger in his hand, his empty eyes devoid of any emotion as he followed behind Han Shuo, quickly returning the way they'd come. Han Shuo chanted an incantation midway and sent the Little Skull back to the other dimension. Seeing that they were about to return to the tent, Han Shuo couldn't help but slow down his footsteps, moving unhurriedly through the shadows of the trees. It was now the latter half of the night, and the sentries outside the tent had been replaced by Fanny, Lisa, and Amy. Lisa and Amy's eyes were half closed, and they looked drowsy. It was obvious that they were taking advantage of the opportunity to slack off and didn't shoulder their responsibilities at all. Fortunately, Fanny understood the importance of being a sentry. Her pair of bright eyes constantly patrolled the surroundings. When Han Shuo's light footsteps approached, Fanny immediately cast her vigilant gaze in the direction that Han Shuo had come from. With her magic staff in hand, Fanny furrowed her brow, her delicate face full of vigilance. She gradually approached the direction Han Shuo had come from and softly called out, "Who is it?" "Teacher Fanny, it's me," Han Shuo said softly to Fanny as he slowly walked out from the shade of the tree. "I knew it would be you. I went to look for you just now and found that there was no one in your tent. Where did you run off to in the middle of the night?" Fanny's eyes focused on Han Shuo as she asked, full of confusion. "It's nothing, I'm just looking for a secluded place to train my magic." "After I asked you about the bone arrow magic last time, I took advantage of the night to find a secluded place to train. I think that only repeated training can guarantee that I won't make any mistakes." Han Shuo scratched his head and explained in a soft and honest voice. "Brian, it's good that you're so hardworking. I'll explain this matter to the school authorities after you've grasped a bit of magic. This way, you can immediately be relieved of your errand boy status and perhaps even enjoy the same treatment as the students." Fanny looked at Han Shuo and thought for a moment. "Oh, I was sold to the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. Could it be that I can be relieved of my status as an errand boy and slave just because I know magic?" Han Shuo was startled and asked. Nodding, Fanny said with certainty, "There has never been a mage who has been an errand boy or slave. Mages are a class above all others in the entire profound continent. Even though our necromancy major has declined, if you can prove that you know how to use necromancy magic, your status will immediately change. You won't be reduced to an errand boy who cleans and cleans anymore. Is that so? That's wonderful. I still have many questions that I hope Teacher Fanny can answer for me. I will work hard to improve myself as soon as possible and become a qualified mage. Han Shuo's heart raced as he suddenly remembered that there were still many questions he wasn't clear about in some of the magic books he'd read before. He couldn't help but want to take advantage of this opportunity to clarify things. No problem. In the future, if you have any questions about necromancy magic, you can ask me. I will help you. Although you're a bit perverted right now, I'm sure that you're a genius with a magical body. I will definitely help you escape from your current status. Fanny smiled faintly and said in a sweet voice. Han Shuo smiled foolishly, as if he hadn't heard Fanny's words about him being lecherous. After thinking for a moment, he started asking Fanny for some magic knowledge. After a while, Fanny cried out in surprise and looked at Han Shuo in astonishment. She said with emotion, "Oh my gosh, Brian, you already know so much about magic. Where did you learn all of this? Your questions are on par with the average mage apprentices. This is incredible. I've read all of this magic knowledge from the magic books inside when I was helping Jack clean the library. I've been trying to find out why ever since I discovered that I could cast the bow and arrow magic." Han Shuo lied with a straight face and an apologetic expression as he spoke to Fanny. "Brian, I wasn't wrong after all. You really are a genius in magic." Fanny cried out in surprise again when she heard Han Shuo's explanation. At this moment, the sound of footsteps suddenly rang out in Han Shuo's ears. Han Shuo's face grew serious as he hastily said, "There's a sound approaching, but it doesn't sound like a magical creature this time. It sounds more like a human." Fanny's expression changed slightly when she heard Han Shuo's words. She reached out and grabbed Han Shuo's arm in a panic, walking quickly in the direction of the tent. She said as she walked, "There are all kinds of races in the dark forest. These races aren't all that friendly. Even some humans like us will sometimes want to kill for a high-level magical creature core. We should be on our guard." Fanny's slender hand grasped Han Shuo's wrist amidst the chaos. Fanny didn't have any other thoughts, but Han Shuo harbored ill intentions. When her hand grabbed his wrist, the smooth feeling of her 5 fingers on his wrist caused Han Shuo to become a bit infatuated. He suddenly recalled the ecstasy he'd felt on the warhorse a few days ago. "Everyone get up. Lisa and Amy, you too, wake everyone up and prepare for battle. Danger may be approaching." Lisa and Amy, who had been squinting their eyes, were both startled awake when Fanny's words sounded. The two also sensed the impending danger from Fanny's panicked voice, and they both started shouting and running to the tents to warn the others. For a time, Lisa and Amy's screams came from several tents. The sleeping students all rushed out of their tents with their clothes in a mess, their eyes half open and their clothes disheveled as they hastily prepared for battle. At this moment, Fanny unintentionally glanced at Han Shuo and discovered that Han Shuo was smiling merrily at her jade hand on Han Shuo's wrist. His expression seemed to be one of enjoyment. Angry, Fanny grabbed Han Shuo's jade hand and pinched it fiercely before letting go. She said angrily to Han Shuo in a low voice, "Damned Brian, I've discovered that you're almost as lustful as Fitch." Han Shuo yelped in pain and wore an awkward and silly smile on his face, but he was speechless inside. He wondered what Fanny would think if she knew that he was the one who touched her but last time. In the midst of the students' panic, a few heavy footsteps gradually approached from afar, falling into everyone's ears. Han Shuo also started to calm down after being pinched by Fanny. The lustful light in his eyes disappeared without a trace, replaced by a deep, distant coldness. He looked at everything around him with the cold eyes of a bystander. Heavy footsteps, accompanied by strange wheezing noises, approached the group. Jean's brow furrowed and he said in confusion, "Such heavy footsteps, it shouldn't be humans. But magical creatures with 2 feet are rare as well. What could it be?" Fanny furrowed her brow in deep thought, and then her eyes lit up. she suddenly called out. Everyone hurry up and summon the skeletal warriors to hold the front. We've probably run into the ogres in the dark forest. Everyone started when the words ogres came out of Fanny's mouth. Some of the female students shuddered as expressions of fear appeared on their faces. Jean was also startled and hastily summoned everyone to quickly form a ring of defense. He also took out a brown magic staff that looked like the root of a tree and had a cautious expression on his face. Lines of magical incantations flowed continuously from the mouths of the students and teachers. Skeletal warriors, ghouls, and zombie warriors appeared out of thin air in front of everyone, as well as the two enormous hate warriors that Fanny and Jean had summoned. Hate warriors were already a relatively high-level existence amongst the dark creatures. These hate warriors were enormous in size and wielded metal clubs. The fat on their bodies gave them even more strength and sturdier defenses. They were the most commonly used meat shields by necromancers. As expected, with heavy footsteps, 8 ogres that were 2.5 meters tall and had lead-colored skin appeared before everyone's eyes. They were wielding maces and spears. Ogres were social animals, and a dozen or so ogres could be considered a tribe. These ogres were lazy by nature and liked to plunder. They were all natural bandits. They knew how to use clubs and long spears. Add to that their bodies were strong and sturdy, and their close combat abilities were quite powerful. However, what frightened everyone the most wasn't the ogre's strength, but their habits. As the name suggested, ogres were called ogres because they ate humans. When they encountered humans in the midst of plundering, not only would they take everything, but they would also capture humans and eat them as food. Han Shu and the others formed a ring of defense around them. The skeletal warriors, ghouls, and zombie hate warriors formed a defensive perimeter around them. There were necromancers with long-range attacks within the perimeter. All of them looked gravely at the panting ogres approaching. "Prepare for battle!" Fanny called out loudly as she raised the magic staff in her hand. Chapter 36. Huff, huff! The 8 ogres made strange noises as they moved. The strongest and tallest ogre pointed his club at them, and the ogres suddenly began to run quickly, charging in their direction. But before the ogres could draw near, the students and teachers started chanting spells. Bone arrows shot out of the air towards the ogres, and those who were stronger than magic apprentices chanted even more powerful bone spears. Bone spears and bone arrows were both necromancy spells, but required novice mages to be able to control them. They were a bit more powerful than bone arrows. Bone arrows and bone spears flew out of the air at the same time and shot towards the 8 ogres. The 8 ogres also knew how to dodge the bone arrows and bone spears as they ran. However, ogres weren't a race that excelled in speed, and they were all hit by the bone arrows and bone spears. However, the ogres' bodies were exceedingly tough, and the bone arrows only made them squeal in pain when they landed on their bodies. They affected their running speed, but couldn't penetrate their flesh. Only when the bone spears landed on their bodies did they leave bloody holes on their bodies, leaving behind some green blood. The 8 ogres were continuously injured as they ran, but none of them had completely lost their ability to attack. They actually quickly charged into the outer defensive perimeter and started attacking inside. Han Shu was calm and unruffled in the middle of the defensive perimeter. His face was calm as he watched the ogres quickly approach and slowly gauged the fighting strength of the ogres. "Have the dark creatures attack!" Fanny's face was solemn as she suddenly yelled out loudly when the ogres drew near. Everyone started directing the dark creatures on the outer perimeter to attack the ogres after Fanny's words had sounded. The summoned ghouls, skeleton warriors, zombie warriors, and hate warriors all stood firmly in place, immediately starting to attack when the ogres drew near. But the ogres were tall and strong, and their skin and flesh had exceedingly high defensive capabilities. Apart from the metal club attacks of the hate warriors, the attacks of the other dark creatures were of limited use. Especially the ghouls and skeleton warriors. Under the ferocious smashing of the ogre's wolf-tooth club, the skeletons would immediately fall apart, and the ghouls would die a horrible death. The zombie warrior's skin and flesh were sturdy enough to withstand a few hits from the wolf-toothed mace. However, after a few more hits, it would stagger and lose its ability to attack. These damned ogres are really troublesome. Xian watched as the dark creatures on the outskirts fell one by one, but the ogres remained standing despite bleeding profusely from the magical attacks. He couldn't help but feel anxious. We have to hold them off. Don't let them get close to us. Otherwise, we'll die if we face the ogres in close combat. Fanny shouted, looking a little worried. Bone spears appeared out of thin air as she chanted. They stared at one of the ogres, and one of them finally pierced through the ogre's eye socket, piercing through its skull. The ogre swayed a few times before falling lifelessly to the ground. After one of the ogres had been killed by Fanny, the remaining 7 ogres seemed to suddenly go berserk. 2 of the ogres wielding spears seemed to have been inspired as they suddenly threw their spears out with strange huffs. The spears drew an arc through the air and whistled sharply as they nailed into the bodies of the 2 hate warriors. The 2 hate warriors were the strongest meat shields in the outer perimeter. Although they didn't immediately lose their ability to move after their bodies were nailed to the ground, their movements became even more sluggish. They wouldn't be of much use after being held back by the 2 ogres. At this time, only 2 hate warriors and 6 zombie warriors were left in the outer defensive perimeter. The zombie warriors were inferior to the hate warriors in every aspect. Once the hate warriors were nailed to the ground by the spears, the pressure on the zombie warriors greatly increased. 2 zombie warriors had fallen in just a short while. What do we do? What do we do? Will these damned ogres eat us? Heavens, why are their skin and flesh so tough? The bone arrows are completely useless against them. We're done for, we're done for. We should have gone back yesterday, boo-hoo. Low cries of complaint and fear abruptly rang out from the mouths of the students. Even their magical incantations were affected in that moment. Master Jean, let's use the corpse explosion spell together. Hurry! Fanny's face darkened when she saw that everyone was so dejected, and she suddenly called out loudly. Soul of Nirvana, by my command, offer your body to me. Explode violently, corpse explosion! Fanny and Jean both chanted their incantations at the same time. After the incantations were complete, Fanny pointed at the ogre that she'd killed with her bone spear, and Jean pointed at a zombie warrior that had fallen to the ground. 2 violent explosions suddenly sounded out from the bodies of the ogre and zombie warrior. The 4 injured ogres and 2 zombie warriors on the side were all affected by the shockwaves and were abruptly blown into the air. The 4 ogres and 2 zombie warriors that had been blown into the air didn't move at all. They were obviously done for. Han Shuo's eyes sparkled as he stared closely at Fanny. He was very shocked by the power of the corpse explosion spell. Han Shuo had clearly seen that after Fanny had chanted the corpse explosion spell, the exploding ogre's body had suddenly lit up and exploded with a terrifying force. Of the 4 ogres that had been blown to death, 3 had been killed by Fanny's corpse explosion spell. Han Shuo had only heard a little about the corpse explosion spell, and understood that only adept mages could cast it. The power of the spell would vary according to the difference in magic power and the strength of the exploding object. It was the same corpse explosion spell, but Fanny's was clearly much more powerful than Jean's. This might have something to do with Fanny's magic power and the ogre's as a medium. However, it seemed that the corpse explosion spell consumed a lot of mental strength. Fanny and Jean's faces were pale and they panted heavily after casting the corpse explosion spell. Up until now, there had been a total of 8 ogres. 1 had been killed by Fanny's bone spear, and another 4 had been killed by the 2 corpse explosion spells. Although the 2 hate warriors had been hit by the ogre's spears, they still held their ground and firmly entangled the 2 ogres. Only the strongest and tallest ogre hadn't suffered much damage yet. He wielded a spiked club and charged over as if he'd gone berserk. Strange cries came from his mouth, and he even spat out the simple common language. I'll kill you all. We've just used the corpse explosion spell and our mental strength is pretty much depleted. We can't use other adept spells for now. Everyone run! Jean's face was full of panic as he called out loudly. Fanny looked at the group and urged urgently, "Everyone leave quickly and don't get caught by the ogre." Everyone panicked even more after hearing Fanny and Jean's words. They didn't care about the supplies around them, and were all panic-stricken as they tried to distance themselves from the ogre who was running towards them with large strides and a spiked club in hand. However, although the ogre wasn't too fast, he was still a bit faster than them. Especially when the students were panicking, they tripped over the bones of the skeletal warriors as they ran. This made their speed even slower than the tall ogre. Fanny was concerned about the students, and kept urging them to leave, dragging herself behind. The tall ogre had just seen that Fanny had cast the corpse explosion spell and killed 3 ogres. When he saw that Fanny had fallen behind, he didn't think much and caught up to Fanny, raising his spiked club high and smashing it down fiercely at Fanny. "Watch out, Master Fanny! Watch out, Fanny, behind you!" Lisa, Jean, and the others cried out involuntarily in fear when they saw the ogre's spiked club swinging towards Fanny in their panic. Fanny heard a few people's reminders and turned around to find that the spiked club was already smashing down on her. The sharp spikes of the spiked club sparkled with a cold light, and the whooshing sound indicated just how powerful the force behind the blow was. Her pretty face was deathly pale and her beautiful legs suddenly lost all strength. She watched helplessly as the spiked club grew larger and larger in front of her eyes. A wave of desolate helplessness suddenly rose up in Fanny's heart. Sparks flew in all directions with a clang. Fanny's beautiful eyes widened as she stared blankly in front of her. Unbeknownst to her, 2 wolf-tooth maces had appeared in front of her. These 2 wolf-tooth maces had collided with each other. The sharp teeth of the 2 wolf-tooth maces had already been flattened, and there were even some metallic sparks emitting from them. Following the direction of the spiked club that had blocked the ogre's blow, Fanny suddenly discovered that on her left, Han Shuo's hands were tightly gripping a thick spiked club that was completely disproportionate to his body. At this moment, the veins on Han Shuo's forehead and arms were bulging, and his expression was ferocious as he glared at the ogre. Chapter 37. "Brian, it's Brian!" The students cried out in surprise. Fanny was also a bit dumbfounded as she looked at Han Shuo as a stranger. She hadn't thought that Han Shuo would be able to swing such a thick spiked mace with his 1.70-meter frame, and block one of the ogre's ferocious blows. As everyone stared dumbfounded, Han Shuo's eyes were fixed on the ogre's body. He freed up his right hand and pushed Fanny, saying in a low voice, "Hurry and go." A panicked shriek emitted from Fanny's mouth. Han Shuo suddenly felt his right hand press down on 2 soft and large cotton balls at the same time. When he pulled his hand back, Han Shuo already knew that he must have pressed down on the wrong place. The nearby students all gasped softly at this moment, including Jean's loud curses, accusing Han Shuo of having the audacity for lust. His heart fluttering, Han Shuo turned to look at Fanny and said awkwardly, "I'm sorry, Master Fanny. I pushed the wrong place. I really didn't mean to." Fanny was exasperated and was about to open her mouth to curse Han Shuo when she suddenly sensed the ogre's enormous spiked club smashing towards Han Shuo's head. She hurriedly warned, "Brian, watch out!" The naive look on his face was still present as Han Shuo suddenly turned around and easily raised the spiked club that was thicker than his body with both hands. With a whistling sound, he once again smashed it towards the ogre's incoming spiked club. With a clang, sparks flew once again. Han Shuo's body didn't move at all, standing in place like a boulder. His thin and small body grasping the thick spiked club was reflected in everyone's eyes, causing all the students to suddenly look at Han Shuo with a strange look in their eyes. "Master Fanny, hurry and leave!" Jean's loud exclamation suddenly sounded at this moment. Fanny had been looking at Han Shuo with a face full of shock when she finally reacted. Her bright eyes were still focused on Han Shuo as she walked backwards in the direction of Jean and the others. Han Shuo had just used strength to resist 2 blows from the ogre, and felt a strong desire to vent all the strength in his body. A faint desire to kill also rose in Han Shuo's heart, making Han Shuo want to smash the ogre into a meat patty. Han Shaw suddenly howled with laughter as soon as Fanny left. The simple and honest look on his face was nowhere to be found, and his expression was a bit sinister and frightening. He raised his thick mace with a dark face and actually charged towards the confused ogre. This strongest ogre couldn't seem to understand how Han Shaw could block 2 of his heavy blows with such a small body. He stood there dumbly, as if deep in thought. Heavens, Brian must have gone mad. He's charging at the ogre! Bella exclaimed softly, a look of disbelief on her face. Everyone nodded in agreement when these words were spoken. They all took it for granted that Han Shaw had gone mad. Even Lisa, who knew that Han Shaw liked to play the fool, had a bewildered expression on her face. She was shocked by Han Shaw's madness in this moment. Brian suddenly became so strong after he went mad. This is incredible. Lisa is so great. An agony of the soul spell was able to turn the cowardly Brian into such a crazy person. Amy exclaimed innocently and looked at Lisa with a sigh of admiration. You talk too much. Lisa stared fixedly at Han Shaw and replied to Amy. At this moment, Han Shaw raised the thick spiked club and charged at the ogre like lightning. The spiked club whistled strangely in the air as Han Shaw tightened his grip on it. He swung it upwards in an arc and smashed it towards the ogre's waist. The ogre's expression turned from bewilderment to fury when he saw the danger approaching. He repeated his previous actions and once again collided with Han Shaw's club, as if he wanted to completely defeat Han Shaw in terms of strength. Sounds of enormous collisions rang out continuously as the 2 maces clashed. The originally sturdy and thick maces, with their sharp spikes, were all flattened by the repeated collisions. The frail Han Shaw and the tall, muscular ogre actually fought more and more intensely as the sounds of metal clanging rang out. Fanny and the others, who had originally planned to quickly escape, were stunned when they saw that Han Shaw had such terrifying strength after going berserk, and that he was able to fight the ogre to a standstill. They all gaped at Han Shaw's strength. Han Shaw didn't show the slightest bit of fear as he wielded the spiked club that was completely disproportionate to his body. His exposed arms, neck, and forehead were actually lined with strong muscles, and his veins were bulging. Han Shaw's expression was ferocious and crazed at this moment. He had a fearless bravery that completely overturned Fanny and the students' understanding of him. At this moment, the magical yuan circulated within Han Shaw's body, and he felt an unrestrained pleasure as his strength exploded forth. The more he wielded the spiked club, the more proficient he became. Not only did Han Shaw not feel the slightest bit of exhaustion, he actually felt more and more energized. Kiki! A few strange cackles emitted from Han Shaw's mouth, his expression savage. The ogre's body involuntarily staggered backwards after a fierce attack. The originally ferocious attacks and enormous strength had become weaker and weaker after this short period of collision. My gosh, is this still the cowardly Brian? Bella exclaimed and shook her head in disbelief. I won't dare use Brian to practice my magic in the future. He's too scary when he goes crazy. Athena had a look of lingering fear as she murmured to herself. Lisa's expression was one of excitement as she clenched her small fists tightly. She screamed from time to time, "Beat him up!" Bach and the others who held grudges against Han Shaw looked at each other with timid expressions. They looked at Han Shaw with a bit of fear in their eyes. Kiki, you can't run! Han Shaw cackled and followed closely behind the escaping ogre. He swung his thick spiked club, and with a crack, the legs of the scrambling ogre were broken. Han Shaw followed closely behind with a strange cackle, continuously smashing the ogre with his spiked club. Shrill cries of agony continuously emanated from the previously savage ogre's mouth. The ogre's tall and strong body had long since fallen to the ground. Fresh blood splattered continuously from his body. His strong, leaden body was already a bloody mess under Han Shaw's repeated blows, and its original appearance was almost unrecognizable. Such a violent storm of blows continued for a minute. Han Shaw seemed to suddenly wake up after he saw that the ogre had been smashed into a bloody mess. Han Shaw himself was startled when he stopped. He hadn't thought that Han Sho would have such a violent side to him. This was the first time he'd killed someone, but Han Sho didn't feel the lingering fear that a normal person would have. After his expression had calmed down, Han Sho turned to look at Fanny and the students. He grinned honestly and said, "He seems to be dead?" Contrary to Han Sho's expectations, all the students, including the two instructors, Fanny and Jean, screamed and took 2 steps back when they saw Han Sho turn around. Lisa then cried out in surprise and asked, "Boo! Brian, are you feeling better?" Han Sho started and immediately reacted. He scratched his head and said with a silly smile, "What happened to me just now? I don't even know what I did. How did the ogre suddenly die? What did you do just now? Did you forget?" Fanny was also stunned and then frowned as she stared at Han Sho. Nodding honestly, Han Sho explained sincerely, "Yes, I felt my head hurt, and then forgot what happened. When I woke up, the ogre was already dead in front of me." "What's going on?" There were 2 other ogres. Where did they go?" "You scared them away." Bella looked oddly at Han Sho and answered, "No way. How could this be? Why would they be afraid of me?" Han Sho had an innocent look on his face as he spoke in bewilderment. "Brian, you've become so scary after you've gone mad. It's like you're another person. Not just the ogres, even we're a bit afraid of you. It's a good thing you're alright now." Jean sighed emotionally and said what everyone else was thinking. "Don't just stand there. Hurry up and pack up. We can't stay here any longer. 2 of the ogres have escaped, and they might cause trouble for us." Fanny was still relatively calm. When she saw that the danger had been temporarily averted, she hurriedly instructed everyone to quickly prepare for the aftermath. Under Fanny's orders, everyone returned to their original positions and picked up the items that had been scattered on the ground. This was the first time that everyone had faced a life and death crisis. After facing death head-on, the students had all become more composed. They didn't waste any words and quickly packed up everything. "I think it's time to leave this place and end this trial," Jean suggested solemnly when he saw that everyone had packed up. After experiencing the battle with the ogres, everyone recognized their strength. They weren't as strong as they'd imagined, and the further south they went, the greater the danger. Therefore, everyone looked at each other and nodded in agreement after Jean's suggestion. After a moment of silence, everyone silently began to pack up, planning to return to the academy with the spoils of this trip and not continue the dangerous journey south. However, just as the crowd was about to leave, a mournful cry suddenly sounded from the south. The crowd that had just finished packing up their belongings and were about to leave were all stunned when they heard the sound. Then, excitement and greed appeared on their faces. Chapter 38. It's the cry of a frost eagle. The frost eagle is a solitary magical creature. We've already killed one before. Should we kill this one as well before leaving? Jean's face lit up with joy as he looked at everyone and asked. The frost eagle's magical core was of the 4th level, and was worth much more than the Windblade wolf. Although everyone had expended a great deal of effort to kill one, they already had the experience of dealing with the frost eagle. Now that Jean had said this, everyone started. Fanny then looked at Han Sho and asked, "Brian, what do you think? There's a huge sum of money in front of us. I think we should take it." Han Sho scratched his head and answered with a silly smile. "All right then, everyone get ready. We'll take the Frost Eagle's core and then return to the academy. If our necromancy major can obtain 2 level 4 magical cores this time, the other majors won't dare look down on us." Fanny nodded and instructed everyone to move out. When the group heard this, they seemed to remember the humiliation they'd suffered earlier and began to move angrily. They followed behind Han Sho and Fanny, walking in the direction of the Frost Eagle's cry. Han Sho walked in front like he was the leader. Everyone had a matter-of-fact expression on their faces, and no one had any objections. Unknowingly, they'd already begun to change their opinion of Han Sho. Now, no one dared to treat Han Sho as a little errand boy that could be bullied at will. Their gazes towards Han Sho had a faint hint of respect. The group hurried along the Frost Eagle's cry and arrived at the location of the Frost Eagle after a short while. However, they were stunned by the scene that greeted their eyes. Using the bright moonlight, everyone could see a tall, handsome young man with messy silver hair, dashing eyebrows, and starry eyes. He was holding a long sword in his hand and fighting with the Frost Eagle in the sky. He wore a simple warrior's suit, and his shoulders, chest, and abdomen were wrapped in shining silver armor. Judging from his clothes and attire, he was a knight. When the long sword in his hand danced, rays of piercing milky white light flashed and struck the Frost Eagle circling in the sky, causing it to cry out continuously. "My gosh, milky white fighting aura, he's an Earth Knight! Ooh, he's so handsome!" Bella exclaimed in surprise, her eyes fixed tightly on the Earth Knight's body with a look of infatuation on her face. The few female students beside her also revealed fascinated expressions, their eyes shining brightly as they stared at the Earth Knight who was easily dealing with the Frost Eagle. Hansho furrowed his brow. He was also shocked by the Earth Knight's strength. Last time, Hansho's party of 12 had found it very difficult to deal with a single Frost Eagle. They'd used all of their strength in the end to kill it. This Earth Knight was facing the Frost Eagle by himself. Not only did he not seem to be strained, but he even seemed to be skillful and at ease. After the milky white doji was released, the Frost Eagle continuously emitted low cries. A milky white fighting aura soared into the sky, heading straight for the battered Frost Eagle. The Frost Eagle seemed to sense danger and flapped its wings, intending to leave. At this moment, the Earth Knight, who had been standing on the ground, suddenly sped up and flew into the air. His long sword slashed across the Frost Eagle's abdomen. With a mournful cry, the Frost Eagle swayed and finally fell from the sky powerlessly. "So cool!" Bella's eyes glowed as she giggled. The Earth Knight walked next to the Frost Eagle's corpse and picked up the Frost Eagle's magical core with his long sword. He then walked with large strides to Han Shui and the others with a smile. After sweeping his gaze over everyone, he bowed and said courteously, "Knight Clark greets the noble mages." "Hello Clark, you're so strong to be able to kill a Frost Eagle by yourself." "That's amazing!" Bella laughed lightly in a reserved manner and spoke softly, as if she changed into a different person. However, Clark's gaze didn't linger on Bella's body. He kept his eyes on Fanny, seeming to wait for Fanny's reply. This made Bella feel a bit awkward. "We're teachers and students of the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. We've come to the Dark Forest to train this time." "It's nice to meet you, Clark." Fanny's expression didn't change as she also bowed slightly in return and smiled. "So that's how it is. I've also come to the Dark Forest to train. The magical beasts here are very strong and very suitable for raising my strength. I hadn't thought that I'd run into you all here, heh." Clark smiled faintly as he looked at Fanny. There was a strange flavor to his gaze that made Han Shaw feel a bit uncomfortable. "Master Fanny, now that he's killed the Frost Eagle, I think we should be able to return." Han Shaw stared at Clark a few times and suddenly understood why he'd felt a bit uncomfortable with Clark's gaze. It was because Clark's gaze when he looked at Fanny was a bit similar to Jean's. Although it wasn't as exaggerated as Jean's, it already vaguely explained one thing. Clark seemed to have a favorable impression of Fanny's beauty. Yes. Master Fanny, it's getting more and more dangerous now. We should return to the academy for the students' safety." Jean also seemed to sense the threat, and his gaze towards Clark was a bit unfriendly. He immediately chimed in after hearing Han Shaw's suggestion. Fanny nodded after hearing Han Shu and Jean's words. She was about to agree when Clark suddenly smiled faintly and said, "If honored mages don't mind, I can travel with you. I think it'll be beneficial for all of us if we travel together, and the danger will be greatly reduced. Are you all willing?" "All right, if there's an Earth Rider with us, our gains this time will surely surpass those of the Light Major." Bella's face lit up with joy before Fanny could agree, and she abruptly spoke up. The other female students all voiced their assent after Bella's words. Only Lisa's face was unmoved as she stared oddly at Han Shu and sized him up. The male students didn't say anything and looked indifferent. Clark's words and Bella's incitement made Fanny, who'd been about to leave, hesitate a bit. Fanny's heart was especially moved when Bella said that their gains would surpass those of the light major. Don't agree. Smiling all the time isn't a good thing. This kid is obviously up to no good. Don't agree to travel with him. Han Shaw looked at Fanny and spoke continuously in his heart. Alright, then we'll have to trouble you. We're all mages. If such a strong Earth Rider like you joins us, you'll be of great help to us. Fanny hesitated for a while and finally agreed. Han Shaw was extremely disappointed, but he didn't show it on his face. Instead, he cried out in surprise, Aya, we've been chasing this frost eagle all this time. Who would have thought that you'd already killed it? AI, a level 4 magical creature core is gone just like that. A startled expression appeared on Clark's face when he heard Han Shaw's words. He then looked at Han Shaw with some confusion and asked, You were the ones who were chasing this frost eagle? Nodding his head affirmatively, Han Shaw said with a face full of regret. Yes, but I didn't think that you'd already killed it. Fanny was a bit surprised when she heard Han Shaw's words and glared accusingly at Han Shaw. She was about to open her mouth to explain that this wasn't the case when Clark hesitated and took out the Frost Eagle's magical core with some heartache. He forced a smile and handed it to Fanny, saying, So that's how it is. Since that's the case, I'll return it to you. Master Fanny, you must accept it. Accept, definitely accept. Han Shaw approached with a smile and took the Frost Eagle's core from Clark's hands before Fanny could open her mouth. He then handed it to Lisa beside him and said merrily, Heh, this night Clark is such a good person. He returned a level 4 magical creature core to us so readily. I think he'll be even more forthright in the trials to come. Lisa's eyes shone brightly as she also put the core away merrily with a smile. She nodded approvingly at Han Shaw and secretly gave him a thumbs up. Fanny had been about to open her mouth to explain, but discovered that the core was already in Lisa's pocket in the blink of an eye. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry as she shook her head and rolled her eyes at Han Shaw and Lisa, but didn't say anything else. The core of a level 4 magical creature was equivalent to over 100 gold coins. Even for a minor noble, 100 gold coins wasn't a small sum. It was no wonder that Clark would feel a bit pained when he'd taken it from Clark's hands with just a few words from Han Shaw. Master Fanny, now that we have this noble and generous Earth Knight joining us, I think we can continue heading south. There are certainly more powerful magical creatures there. If we can obtain a level 3 magical creature core, we'll be able to hold our heads high in the academy this time. Han Shaw smiled faintly as he egged Fanny on. He thought that since Clark dared harbor disloyalty towards his woman, he should at least make him do some free hard labor. It would be a waste not to make use of an Earth Knight. Fanny's spirits immediately rose when she heard that they could hold their heads high in the academy. She nodded and smiled daintily. All right, then we'll continue heading south. Noble Knight Clark, I'll have to trouble you to look after us in the future. Clark bowed modestly and smiled politely. It's no trouble at all. I'm happy to be of service. You insist on staying, see if I don't play you to death. Han Shaw was extremely displeased when he saw Clark's appearance, and quickly thought of a vicious plan. Chapter 39. The second day. The group, along with Clark, continued to head south of the dark forest. Because of Clark's addition, it was much easier to deal with the magical creatures they encountered along the way. Clark purposefully showcased himself in front of Fanny. The 2 Windblade Wolves and 1 Frost Eagle along the way were all easily killed with his great assistance. Han Shaw would quickly rush over every time a magical creature was killed and immediately took out the core, handing it to Lisa as a matter of course. He treated it as his side spoils of war, and didn't even leave the fur of the Windblade Wolves for Clark. In order to gain Fanny's favor, Clark still forced a smile on his face and approved of Han Shaw's actions, not fighting for the cores of the magical creatures. The group started a bonfire when it was dusk and Han Shaw started roasting the meat. Clark purposefully hung out with Fanny and chatted humorously with Fanny. Off to the side, Jean glared at Clark like a tiger watching its prey and continuously interjected, using words to pressure Clark. The other students dispersed to rest, chatting and laughing merrily, or silently organizing their things. Only Lisa stayed next to Han Shu and watched as Han Shaw flipped the roasted meat leisurely. Brian, I've discovered that you're becoming more and more naughty. You're very different from before. Lisa held a bright red wooden stick in her hand and unintentionally stirred it in the bonfire. Her bright eyes landed on Han Shaw as she spoke. Flicking a glance at Lisa, Han Shaw said faintly, "Is that so? I'm fine. I just feel that I've been too useless in the past and want to change myself." "What's wrong with that?" Shaking her head, Lisa said. No. I feel that you're not the same as before. I can't say what's going on either. Perhaps it really is because I used the agony of the soul on you that you became like this." Laughing involuntarily, Han Shaw thought that he wasn't Brian at all and had nothing to do with the agony of the soul. Whether it was Lisa, Fanny, or the other teachers and students, they all thought that it was the agony of the soul that caused him to change. It was a bit funny. "Is my change not good?" "Very good, much better than before. I was very angry when I saw how cowardly you were before. I treated you badly in hopes that you'd pull yourself together, but you've always been meek and didn't resist no matter who bullied you. I felt that you were very pitiful at that time and thought that you'd be in pain even if you lived, and that you'd be better off dead. Actually, I used the agony of the soul on you because I didn't want to see you continue living so pitifully." Lisa thought for a moment and looked at Han Shaw. Frowning, Han Shaw looked at Lisa in confusion and asked, "So you're saying that you used the agony of the soul to help me out of kindness?" "Of course." Lisa raised her neck and explained, "Although I've looked for you to train in magic before, I've treated you much better than the other students. It's just that you're a disappointment and live such a useless life. I couldn't stand it anymore and decided to help you free yourself. Look at you now, you've changed so much that even I can't recognize you." Shaking his head, Han Shaw didn't say much, but he still approved of Lisa's actions. That pitiful Brian had indeed lived a useless life. He'd long since had thoughts of suicide, but just hadn't had the courage to do so. However, Han Shaw still couldn't forgive Lisa's actions of helping others die. "Boo! Brian, I think we'll roast the meat ourselves, there's no need to trouble you." Bach, Bella, and the others walked over from afar at this moment and looked at Han Shaw with some fear. In the past few days, all the meat that had been roasted by Han Shaw's hands was delicious beyond compare for Lisa, Fanny, Amy, and the others, but disgusting as hell for Bach, Bella, and the others. After a few days of torment, Bach, Bella, and the others' stomachs were so uncomfortable that they'd had diarrhea for a few days. They'd originally been complaining and cursing at Han Shaw, but after experiencing Han Shaw's crazed behavior yesterday, they didn't even dare to complain or curse anymore. They were deathly afraid that Han Shaw would suddenly go crazy. They were truly a bit afraid of Han Shaw now. Smiling honestly, Han Shaw said a bit embarrassedly, "How can this do? As an errand slave of the necromancy major, roasting food is my job to begin with. It's a bit inappropriate for you delicate bodies to do these things, isn't it?" "Appropriate? Of course it's appropriate. Since we've gone out to train, we should try everything. Not to mention that you saved our lives yesterday, we shouldn't let you take on so many tasks, don't you think so, Bach?" Bella forced a laugh and said with embarrassment, "That's right, we should roast our own food, we can't trouble you with everything." Bach's stomach had been upset for a few days, and he knew that if he still ate the meat that Han Shaw roasted, it would be half raw and half cooked again. He hurriedly said with a fawning smile and paused, "Brian, I was in the wrong before, please don't hate me. If you keep holding a grudge against me, if you lose all reason and come looking for me, I'll be in big trouble. All right, since you're so kind, I'll thank you. Come, you guys roast the meat, I hope you enjoy yourselves." Han Shaw was inwardly pleased as he stood up with a silly smile. He took some of the roasted meat away and handed a large piece to the envious Lisa. He picked up the remaining pieces and walked over to Fanny's side. The enticing aroma of meat slowly spread outwards. Fanny had been listening impatiently to Clark and Jean refuting each other when her eyes suddenly lit up. She licked her lips with her fragrant tongue and a mesmerizing smile appeared at the corners of her mouth. Master Fanny, Master Jean, and Sir Knight Clark, here's your roasted meat. Han Shaw laughed softly and handed the roasted meat to the three of them. Boo-hoo, tree! Brian, why isn't this piece cooked today? It tastes awful! Fanny suddenly exclaimed and spat out the piece of roasted meat she'd just eaten. This time, Fanny's eyesight wasn't too good. Because Han Shaw hadn't given her the roasted meat alone, and she'd chosen the wrong piece. Plus she was in a hurry to eat it. She'd already eaten the roasted meat that Han Shaw had prepared for Jean and Clark before Han Shaw could even remind her. Master Fanny, that piece isn't yours, this is. Han Shaw smiled wryly and thought to himself that she was in too much of a hurry. Han Shaw then hastily handed the piece of meat that he meticulously roasted to Fanny and snatched the half-cooked roasted meat from her hands. He took out a dagger and cut off the piece that Fanny had bitten and handed it to Clark with a smile. He said a bit embarrassedly, Honorable Sir Clark, this piece is yours. My skills aren't that good, so although Master Fanny has already taken a bite, I hope you don't mind? Clark said. I'll just eat bread. How can you be like this? Bread won't increase your stamina much, and you're a knight who greatly needs stamina. You must eat more meat. Could it be that you dislike Brian's cooking skills, or that you've been bitten by Master Fanny? Jean had long since known that those who didn't treat him well would suffer greatly from the food that Han Shaw roasted. He was secretly gloating at Han Shaw's misfortune, but put on a righteous expression on his face as he tried to persuade Clark. No, that's not what I meant. It's just that. Clark's face was full of helplessness as he awkwardly waved his hands and shook his head, not knowing how to explain. He'd clearly seen Fanny spit it out after taking a bite and naturally knew that the roasted meat wasn't tasty at all. As a noble knight, Sir Clark, I understand that you're definitely unwilling to eat something that's been bitten by someone else. Why don't you eat this piece, Master Jean? Han Shaw had a look of understanding on his face as he first insinuated that Clark disliked Fanny, and then pushed the blame onto Jean. Jean began to panic after Han Shaw's words and shook his head with an embarrassed smile. No, absolutely not. How can I take Sir Clark's food? Not to mention that this piece is mine, I'm going to eat first. Traces of sweat could be seen on Jean's forehead as he spoke in a fluster. He hastily took another piece of similarly half-cooked meat from Han Shaw's hands and ran towards where Bach and Bella were as if he was fleeing, obviously planning on roasting it again. Master Jean is such a humble person. It looks like you should take care of this roasted meat. Han Shaw smiled foolishly and planned on forcefully handing the roasted meat to Clark. Clark had a pitiful and wry smile on his face. He then seemed to suddenly remember something and hurriedly said, I forgot something, excuse me. Like Jean, Clark left the area as soon as he'd finished speaking and disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. Brian, you're getting worse and worse. No wonder Jean and Bach keep having diarrhea these days, it's all because of you, isn't it? Fanny glared at Han Shaw with a mix of anger and amusement. Master Fanny, you've only just realized? Brian is really different from before, he's become worse than all the students. Lisa chuckled lightly and then looked oddly at Fanny, saying, Right, Master Fanny, you clearly knew that Brian was purposefully teasing the two of them, why didn't you stop him? That's because I also thought that Clark and Jean were too annoying. They kept bugging me and arguing nonstop, and they even insisted on dragging me along. It was so boring. But this Clark has helped us quite a bit. He really is a good person. Fanny laughed naughtily and explained to Lisa. Han Shaw was secretly pleased when he heard Fanny's words, but he couldn't help but feel angry when Fanny said that Clark was a good person. So that's how it is. Heh, Master Fanny, I know there's a wide pool nearby. The water there is clear and clean. We haven't bathed in a few days, why don't we go swimming tonight? Lisa, you didn't like swimming before, why have you suddenly taken to it recently? Because swimming exercises the body. Lisa's delicate face flushed red when she heard Fanny's question. She turned her head to glance at Han Shu and answered hastily. Han Shu had an odd expression on his face as he thought to himself that Lisa didn't seem to mind on the surface when he told her how to increase her breasts last time, but she'd already taken action in secret. Han Shu couldn't help but find it funny as he gained a deeper understanding of women's minds. Chapter 40. It was night, and the moonlight was clear and cold as it scattered across the vast and boundless dark forest. The bright, silvery moonlight added a few traces of tranquility and comfort to the dark forest. Simple and crude tents were set up on the soft grass. After a day of hard work, the students were either talking in low voices or silently meditating. Han Shu sneakily hid behind a towering tree as he chanted a magical incantation. A streak of light flashed through the air as Little Skull, wielding a bone dagger, suddenly appeared and flew silently towards Clark's tent under Han Shu's instructions. Clark's tent was a bit further away from the other students. Although he appeared to be modest and polite on the surface, apart from his genuine passion towards Fanny, his gaze towards the other students carried a hint of lofty disdain. His tent was also clearly separated from the rest of the group as he walked far away by himself. Little Skull's body was now nimble, and his pitch-black bones blended into the darkness. He didn't make a single sound when he moved, and arrived at Clark's tent in a few dozen seconds. Under Han Shu's orders, Little Skull suddenly rushed into Clark's tent. A muffled cry of pain rang out as Clark's tent collapsed with a loud crash. Little Skull's body abruptly flew out and quickly fled in the southwest direction. Clark cried out in pain and flew out of the tent in a disheveled state. He looked around with his long sword in hand, and quickly chased in the direction that Little Skull had left with a roar of anger, cursing continuously under his breath. Success! Han Shu snickered inwardly. His figure swiftly darted through the shadows of the trees as he chuckled darkly and followed closely behind Clark. Han Shu also walked in the direction that Clark had run in. In the southwest direction, there was a wide pool of water with strange, crooked trees around it. Under the bright moonlight, the water in the pool was clear and sparkled with a silvery luster. A series of splashing sounds, accompanied by waves of tender laughter, came from the pool, adding some liveliness to the quiet pool. Lisa, are you starting to develop? Your breasts seem to be changing recently. Hee, Teacher Fanny, let me tell you. Actually, swimming can enhance your breasts. I only discovered this secret after trying it. Really? Fanny cried out in surprise, then laughed involuntarily and said in a sweet voice, No wonder. I was wondering why you'd suddenly become infatuated with swimming recently. So this is the reason. Hee, then we'll have to swim a little longer today. Teacher Fanny, your breasts are already so perky. Do you still care about this? Hee, of course, there's no woman who wouldn't care about this. I see. Hee, apart from swimming, drinking milk, and massaging while bathing can make your breasts stand out. This is my experience. I've been doing this recently, and I can really feel the changes in my chest. Teacher Fanny, you can try it too. Ah, Lisa, you seem to know a lot now. But the changes in your breasts are real. It looks like your method really will be effective. Of course. Hee, you can't go wrong listening to me. Lisa laughed lightly with pride and said to Fanny. At this moment, the sound of footsteps suddenly sounded from afar. Fanny and Lisa glanced at each other and Fanny frowned, saying softly, What's that sound? Lisa, who had shrunk into the water with only her head sticking out, also had a face full of bewilderment. She shook her head and said, I don't know. I discovered this place when I went to collect wood today. No one should know about it. Fanny and Lisa were a bit surprised and were about to leave when the footsteps grew closer and closer. A sweating Clark suddenly appeared at the edge of the pool and looked left and right, continuously patrolling the area. When Clark saw Fanny and Lisa in the pool, the three of them cried out in surprise at the same time. Lisa was flustered and exasperated as she hastily hid her body in the pool. She pointed a finger at Clark in a panic and shouted angrily, Damn it, you're a noble knight, and yet you're doing something like peeping. How disgusting. No, it's not what you think. I was chasing a monster and found this place. Clark was greatly agitated and hastily tried to explain. Leave this place immediately. Clark, you disappoint me greatly. To think that you're this kind of person. Fanny also had a face full of anger, and her pretty face was covered in frost as she shouted coldly. Master Fanny, I really didn't want to come here to peep. Listen to me explain. Clark was sweating profusely. He hadn't thought that he'd see Fanny and Lisa swimming in a place like this either. He felt that something was off and explained repeatedly. Leave this place, now. Fanny and Lisa both cried out in surprise as Clark explained and yelled at the same time. Smiling wryly with resignation, Clark sighed and bowed slightly to the two in the distance. He said apologetically, I'm sorry, I'll leave immediately. I hope you don't think of me as bad as you think. I really didn't mean to do this. Clark's face was wry as he left dejectedly with his head hung low. A string of complaints flowed from his mouth as he sighed and lamented his terrible luck. Han Shuo's surreptitious figure appeared in the shadows of the trees after Clark had left. He stuck up his middle finger at Clark and said lowly with a sinister smile, You dare steal my woman? Go to hell, noble knight. So even noble knights have such disgusting hobbies. Lisa was still quite indignant and snorted lightly with a face full of disdain. Men are all the same. Noble knights are like this, and lowly errant slaves are also like this. It's just that some people know how to disguise it, and some don't. Fanny also snorted lightly and said with emotion, Errant slave? Master Fanny, you don't mean Brian, do you? Lisa stared blankly, then seemed to think of something and looked at Fanny with an odd expression. No, I was just sighing, purely sighing. Heh, Lisa, don't let your imagination run wild. Having let the cat out of the bag, Fanny was startled when she heard Lisa's question and hastily covered it up with an awkward smile. However, Lisa's face was still full of suspicion after hearing her explanation, and her gaze at Fanny was a bit odd. She murmured lowly, Could you really be talking about Brian? Han Shuo had been hiding in the shade of the tree and was looking at the two lustfully. He couldn't help but feel a pang in his heart when he heard their words, but before Han Shuo had time to sigh with emotion, his eyes suddenly widened and he was completely dumbfounded. At this moment, Fanny was slowly walking to the edge of the pool and her body hidden in the water was slowly revealed bit by bit. The bright moonlight shone on Fanny's perfect and flawless figure. The sparkling and translucent water droplets on her fair skin were like rolling gems under the moonlight, lightly brushing past her silk-like body. Under the moonlight, her upper body was so beautiful that it made Han Shuo's eyes dazzle. Her breasts were full and firm, with two captivating red pearls at the top. There wasn't a trace of excess fat on her abdomen, which was smooth and taut. Her slender arms were as delicate as snow lotuses, and her beautiful light purple hair was wet and messily scattered over her smooth shoulders. She was filled with a beauty that could steal one's soul. Starting from her lower abdomen, the lower half of her body was submerged in the water. However, the clear water still allowed Han Shuo to see her shining white legs under the moonlight. This was the first time that Han Shuo had seen a naked woman with his own eyes, and such an outstanding beauty at that. Under the moonlight, water droplets trickled down from Fanny's body. Her otherworldly beauty and perfect figure caused Han Shuo to be completely dumbfounded. His entire person sank into a half-dazed state for a moment. A strange sound suddenly fell into Han Shuo's ears. Han Shuo, who had been staring blankly at a lotus rising from the water, was startled awake and began to look around. A loud panic yell came from Lisa's mouth. Lisa, who was still in the depths of the pool, pointed behind her in terror and screamed, Master! Fanny, it's the deep-water venom python. Fanny paused and then turned her head. She discovered that an enormous python, 5 or 6 meters long and covered in spikes on its back, was swiftly swimming over from the far end of the pool. The python's dark green pupils shone with a cruel and merciless light, and it spat out dark green smoke from its gaping, fang maw as it rapidly approached Lisa. Run, Lisa, run faster! Fanny's expression also changed abruptly as she screamed in panic. But Lisa seemed to have been scared out of her wits. Her body, which had originally been swimming quickly in the pool, had actually slowed down quite a bit because of the deep-water venom python's appearance, although her hands and legs were madly slapping at the water. "Master Fanny, sob, save me!" Lisa's voice whimpered as she screamed in terror and panic. She used both her hands and feet in an attempt to quickly swim to the shore, but the deep-water venom python was closing in on her. "Damn it, where's that Clark now?" Fanny cursed without a care for her emotions, and her perfect figure began to turn back in Lisa's direction. Han Sha had completely awakened at this moment. Looking at the deep-water venom python that was closing in on the two of them, Han Sha hesitated for a moment, and finally sprinted out from the shadows of the trees, yelling loudly. "What's going on?" Deep-water venom python, I'm coming to help you." The deep-water venom python was a rank 3 magical creature. Not only did it have a powerful physical body, it could also spit out poisonous mist. Now that it was still in the water, both its speed and its threat had greatly increased. A rank 4 magical creature, Frost Eagle, was something that the group had to use the strength of 9 oxen and 2 tigers to kill. This rank 3 deep-water venom python would definitely be even more difficult to deal with. Even Han Sho himself didn't have the slightest bit of confidence. But he couldn't just watch as Fanny was eaten, so he could only risk his life and charge out. "Damn it, let's go all out!" Han Sho took out a dagger, and his body flashed like lightning, directly flying towards the pool after a flash in the darkness. Chapter 41. In the pool, the deep-water venom python raised waves that reached the sky and swam quickly towards Lisa with impressive momentum. The more flustered Lisa was, the harder it was for her to escape. The distance between the person and the python had already shrunk to 20 meters. Fanny, who had already reached the shore, threw caution to the wind and splashed the water, rushing towards Lisa like a mermaid. Han Shua's speed was even faster, and his body didn't seem to encounter any resistance in the water as he closed in on Fanny like lightning. After practicing magical yuan, Han Shua's bodily functions were far superior to those of ordinary people. When Han Shua used his full strength, an astonishing amount of energy immediately burst forth. Han Shua had also arrived at the same time that Fanny closed in on Lisa. Han Shua didn't allow for any explanation as he reached out with both hands, grabbing Lisa with one hand and wrapping the other around Fanny's waist. He shouted fiercely, "Go!" At this moment, Han Shua had no time to feel the smoothness and softness of Lisa and Fanny's bodies. In his panic, he only had the thought of leaving this place as quickly as possible. His legs moved like a fish in the water, and with the help of Fanny's hands and feet, the three entangled as they swam towards the shore without a care for anything else. Except, if it was just Han Shua alone, he might actually have been able to escape the deep-water venom python's pursuit. But with the addition of Fanny and Lisa, Han Shua's speed was greatly affected. It was hard for him to recover his previous speed, and he could only watch as the deep-water venom python came closer and closer. Lisa's frightened cries and whimpers didn't stop for even a moment. Even Fanny was powerless at this moment, as a look of shock and panic appeared on her face. Even summoning dark creatures to fight in the pool wouldn't be of much use. The deep-water venom python's skin was extremely thick, and normal necromancy magic wouldn't be able to stop it. If they stopped and chanted an incantation, they would be bound to be entangled by it, and then inevitably be eaten by it. Boo-hoo! What do we do? What do we do? Are we going to be eaten by it? Lisa whimpered in panic, her hands slapping the surface of the water more and more powerless. Fanny also didn't know what to do. She could only watch helplessly as the deep-water venom python closed in on her, but she couldn't find a way to dodge or escape. She could only desperately swim. After a moment's hesitation, Han Shua hardened his heart. A resolute expression suddenly appeared on his face as he grabbed Lisa's right hand and abruptly exerted force. He gathered all his strength and flung Lisa's naked, dainty, and beautiful body shot out of the water, She streaked across the air for 3 meters and flew straight towards the shore. His left hand, which was originally on Fanny's waist, suddenly pressed on Fanny's beautiful buttocks. Before Fanny could scream, Han Sho had already used all his strength to help Fanny, who was swimming at a fast speed. This made Fanny's swimming speed suddenly increase, and she stabbed towards the shore like an arrow. "Hurry and go!" Han Sho roared and suddenly turned his head, facing the deep-water venom python that was already in front of him alone. "Brian, Master Fanny, hurry and save Brian!" Lisa's desolate voice cried out in alarm from afar. "Lisa, hurry and get ashore. Only when we're ashore can we help Brian." At this moment, Han Sho's gaze was cold and severe. He gripped the dagger in his hand tightly as he watched the deep-water venom python's tail wrap around him. Unexpectedly, Han Sho advanced instead of retreating. Before the deep-water venom python's tail could wrap around him, he actually dashed out at high speed towards the python's head. Han Sho understood that no matter how fast he swam in this pool, he still couldn't compete with the deep-water venom python in terms of speed. Now that he was stuck close to it, there was only death awaiting him if he continued to throw caution to the wind and flee. The deep-water venom python's entire body was hard and thick, and only its neck was soft. If he wanted to escape this disaster, close combat was the only way to survive. The deep-water venom python probably hadn't anticipated that Han Sho would counterattack instead of fleeing. After that enormous tail wrapped around him, it only made a rather large arc, but didn't touch Han Sho. The deep-water venom python's dark green eyes flashed as if it was mocking Han Sho's ignorance. A mouthful of dark green smoke shot out from its large, dense, fanged maw as it raised its neck and sprayed towards Han Sho's head. "Brian, be careful of the smoke it's spraying out. That smoke has a slow, paralyzing effect. It'll cause a person's body to stiffen until they're unable to move." At this moment, Fanny called out loudly from afar, reminding Han Sho to pay attention to the dark green poisonous smoke that the deep-water venom python was spewing out. Startled, Han Sho quickly swam on the surface of the water and held his breath before hastily diving into the water. Using the clear water, he identified the deep-water venom python's position and suddenly charged over. After dodging another sweep of the deep-water venom python's tail midway, Han Sho had already appeared directly under the python's neck. Han Sho's body and the dagger in his hand shot out of the water at the same time. The dagger flashed with a cold light, drawing a trace of silver under the moonlight as it fiercely pierced towards the soft flesh of the deep-water venom python's neck. With a poochie sound, the dagger disappeared completely, and blood spurted out. The deep-water venom python let out a mournful wail, and after twisting its neck, its huge body began to writhe madly. Han Sho was startled and hurriedly pulled out the dagger, pressing his right palm fiercely against the python's neck. The red flames of the mystical glacial spout fire flashed and disappeared, instantly landing on the python's neck. After being invaded by the red flames of the mystical glacial spout fire, the deep-water venom python became even more berserk, and shrill cries rang out incessantly. Before Han Sho could react, a cloud of dark green smoke had already spread to Han Sho's body. Wisps of strange gas seeped into Han Sho's body through Han Sho's pores. Han Sho felt his entire body go numb, suddenly numb and powerless. Even the dagger seemed to have become as heavy as 1,000 kilograms. "Oh my God, Brian's been sprayed by the poisonous smoke. What about Master Fanny? What's going to happen?" Lisa had already reached the shore, and when she saw that Han Sho had been sprayed by the poisonous smoke, she abruptly yelled out loudly and urgently, "Oh, endless darkness, transform into the bone spears of destruction. With my will, destroy everything in front of me, bone spears!" The sound of Fanny chanting an incantation suddenly sounded at this moment. 3 sharp bone spears suddenly materialized out of thin air and pierced towards the frenzied deep-water venom python in the pool with whooshing sounds. Fanny's bone spear magic was indeed extraordinary. All 3 bone spears hit their mark, and 2 of them stabbed into the python's forehead, causing 2 blossoms of blood to blossom. The last bone spear landed on the python's ghastly maw, which had buried its head to devour Han Sho, and broke a few of its sharp fangs. This caused the python's gaping maw, which had been about to devour Han Sho, to be lifted backwards. At this moment, the magical yuan within Han Sho's body abruptly circulated at high speed. Wherever the magical yuan circulated, the numbing feeling instantly disappeared without a trace. Han Sho, who had originally been powerless, once again regained his strength. As the deep-water venom python reared back from Fanny's bone spears, Han Sho's body quickly closed in, the dagger in his hand stabbing twice like lightning, and then he swam towards the shore without a care for anything else. The deep-water venom python suddenly howled in agony, stirring up waves in the pool. When it raised its head again, Fanny and Lisa saw that the python's two dark green eyes were completely overflowing with thick blood. "Oh my God, Brian can still move, and he's even blinded the python, ahaha!" Lisa stood on the shore and shouted loudly. Her previous panicked whimpers had magically turned into excited screams. However, it was precisely because of the deep-water venom python's frenzied rampage that its enormous tail had coincidentally lashed out at Han Sho, causing Han Sho's body, which had been running at high speed, to be struck fiercely. His body flew through the air and fell towards the shore. At the same time, Fanny continued to cast necromancy magic, greeting the weak points of the python's beautiful eyes on the python's neck. Having lost its eyes, the python had no way of dodging Fanny's attacks. The gaping maw on its neck and its eyes were repeatedly pierced by bone spears, setting off increasingly louder and louder waves in the pool. It looked like the python was becoming more and more powerless. The frenzied deep-water venom python didn't know that it should flee at this moment, but rather followed the sounds and tried to approach the shore, as if planning on devouring all of its attackers without a care in the world. It was a pity that as its injuries became more and more severe, the python's frenzy became more and more powerless and pale. In the end, the python collapsed powerlessly. Han Sho's body slowly floated up after falling into the water. His clothes had split open from his chest to his abdomen, and his right cheek was a fiery red. It seemed that he'd been injured by the python's tail. Lisa, who'd been yelling excitedly just now, and Fanny, who'd been reciting incantations, both exclaimed in surprise at the same time. They disregarded their naked bodies and abruptly swam towards the pool at the same time. The two moved quickly and hurriedly dragged Han Sho onto the shore. They saw that Han Sho's abdomen was swollen, water was flowing from the corners of his mouth, and his cheeks were puffed up, as if he'd swallowed quite a bit of pool water. Fanny actually knew a few rescue measures. She immediately pressed her slender hands against Han Sho's chest and squeezed continuously, attempting to squeeze out the pool water that Han Sho had swallowed. Lisa did the same, and under the combined efforts of the two, large mouthfuls of pool water continuously gushed out of Han Sho's mouth. "Why hasn't Brian woken up yet?" After a while, Lisa revealed an anxious expression and looked worriedly at Han Sho. "Maybe he swallowed too much water and his throat is already clogged. Why don't you try to help him breathe?" Fanny looked at Lisa and suggested after thinking for a moment. Lisa's face reddened and she looked at Fanny, saying, "Master Fanny, I don't really understand. Why don't you do it?" Fanny started and furrowed her brow in thought. She hardened her heart and gritted her teeth, saying, "Brian saved both our lives. Forget it, I'll help him try." Fanny lowered her body as soon as she finished speaking. Her tender cheeks were flushed with embarrassment, and her fragrant red lips moved towards Han Sho. In actuality, Han Sho had woken up a long time ago, and had waited patiently for this moment. His heartbeat quickened, and he could still feel the smooth and clean skin of Fanny's arm in his chest. Han Sho was inwardly overjoyed. A wisp of faint fragrance accompanied by a slippery sensation was reflected in Han Sho's mind. Fanny's fragrant tongue reached in and pushed Han Sho's teeth apart. Their mouths and noses touched, and their lips pressed tightly together. Fanny began to help Han Sho breathe. A wonderful feeling of ecstasy instantly spread through Han Sho's entire nerves. Han Sho only felt that this time's adventure hadn't been in vain. He didn't want to wake up, and carefully savored this incomparably wonderful feeling. Fanny lifted her head and exhaled after taking a breath. She paused for a moment, and was about to continue when her bright eyes inadvertently saw that a small tent had strangely risen from the base of Han Shuo's legs. Fanny was stunned for a moment before she suddenly reacted and screamed at a high decibel level. Fanny's jade hands pressed down on Han Shuo's neck and shook him violently, cursing in exasperation. "Damn Brian, I'm going to kill you!" Chapter 42. Papa! Han Shuo spat out a few mouthfuls of saliva and his face flushed red. He hastily pried Fanny's hands off his neck and didn't know what had happened. He hastily said with a pained expression, "Master Fanny, what are you doing? I'm already like this, can't you be a little gentler?" Han Shuo's eyes suddenly widened as soon as he'd finished speaking and stared fixedly at Fanny and Lisa in front of him. The two were completely naked from the waist up and their fair, dainty beauty was completely revealed. Fanny's body was full of grace and beauty, and Lisa's chest was beginning to bulge as she revealed her upper body to Han Shuo's eyes without reservation. The two wore undergarments that were as thin as cicadas' wings in the most crucial area of their lower bodies. The wet water soaked the thin and narrow undergarments. Although he couldn't see the entirety of their bodies, this kind of faintly discernible allure was even more fatal. It caused Han Shuo's brother, who had been about to droop down in shock, to once again stand up tenaciously. Brian, you've finally woken up. Master Fanny, why are you doing this to him?" Lisa was also at a loss as she walked over quickly and said anxiously, "Look at his lower body. If he really fainted from the suffocation, why is there a reaction down there?" Fanny's face was full of irritation as she spoke to Lisa with a red face. She then exerted force without further explanation and cursed lowly, pinching Han Shuo's body here and there. Han Shuo was immediately dumbfounded when he heard Fanny's words. His eyes continued to stare fixedly at the two's bodies as inspiration flashed through his mind. He didn't care if his logic was correct or not and immediately quibbled. "I was hit by the python's poisonous smoke just now and my entire body is stiff and powerless. My lower body is stiff as well, how can you blame me?" Fanny and Lisa looked at each other when these words were spoken and then suddenly realized that the other was still naked. They exclaimed in surprise and screeched loudly at the same time. "Shut up, don't quibble with me. I've never heard of anyone's lower body stiffening after being hit by the deep-water venom python's poisonous smoke. Oh, close your eyes as well. Don't peek. Lisa, let's put on our clothes before we deal with him." Fanny yelled angrily and ran away with Lisa, shrieking. Han Shuo immediately shut his mouth. When the two of them turned around, a pair of shifty eyes suddenly opened, greedily lingering on Fanny's plump and perky buttocks. After a while, Fanny and Lisa, who were dressed neatly, walked over from afar with flushed cheeks. Fanny came over and sized up Han Shuo with a gloomy face. She snorted coldly and said, "Why is it such a coincidence that you would suddenly appear here?" I came over to gather wood and happened to hear your cries for help. That's why I threw caution to the wind and came to your rescue." "Master Fanny, I'm injured, and I didn't mean to look at you. My entire body is stiff and I can't move. The python's tail whipped me from my chest to my right cheek, and it hurts terribly. This was all to save you too." Han Shuo's face was bitter as he lay there facing the sky. His entire body was as stiff as a wooden puppet, and only his mouth and eyes seemed to be able to move. "Master Fanny, although Brian is indeed suspicious, he just saved our lives. Now that he's like this, why don't you let him go?" Lisa looked at Han Shuo from afar and rolled her eyes fiercely at Han Shuo when she saw that Han Shuo's lower body was still firmly erect. She spat lightly and turned her head to plead with Fanny. "Lisa, I was violated by him." Fanny glared at Han Shuo when she saw that Lisa was pleading for leniency, and said a bit anxiously, "Only the three of us know about this. I won't say a word, and Brian definitely won't say a word. Just pretend it never happened. He also saw my body. Although I hate him, he just threw his life away for us. We can't just kill him. Lisa paused and thought for a moment before speaking to Fanny with a wry face. I didn't see it. I didn't see anything just now. I promise, Master Fanny, please don't kill me to silence me. Han Shuo's face was full of panic as his eyes spun rapidly, and he spat out a string of crazy words. Shut up! Fanny shouted angrily and then had a look of helplessness on her face. She thought left and right and stomped her foot fiercely, saying hatefully, This won't end so quickly. I'll let you off today because you're injured, but I'll settle the score with you sooner or later. I haven't settled the score with you last time, but this time it's nothing. Fanny suddenly realized that she'd let the cat out of the bag again halfway through her words and hurriedly changed her words when she saw Lisa looking at her suspiciously again. Master Fanny, you wouldn't be. Lisa looked oddly at Fanny and opened her mouth to speak. No. Fanny immediately cut off Lisa's words fiercely and then explained softly with a sheepish smile. Brian kept making trouble during the last experiment. That's why I said I wanted to settle the score with him. Don't get the wrong idea, isn't that right, Brian? His eyes darting, Han Shuo hastily agreed. Yes, that's exactly what happened. Lisa, keep an eye on Brian. The python is already dead. I'll go extract the magical core from its body. Ha! It's a level 3 magical core this time. We'll be able to hold our heads high when we get back. Fanny didn't dare linger here for fear that she'd let the cat out of the bag again. She hurriedly ran away and swam towards the pool of water, but this time, Fanny didn't undress. After Fanny had left, Lisa, who had distanced herself from Han Shuo, moved closer to Han Shuo and sighed softly, saying lowly, Brian, I didn't think you'd be so stupid. I know that you risked your life to fight the python this time because of me. I only half believed what you said in the trap before, but after this incident, I truly believe you. Brian, I'm actually a bad girl. I'm not worth your sacrifice. Han Shuo. Lisa looked at Han Shuo's dazed expression, and because she'd hit right into Han Shuo's heart, she shook her head and gritted her teeth. Brian, you should give up now. We really aren't suited for each other. Because the difference in status between us is too great, my family will never allow us to interact. I'm sorry, Brian. Han Shuo. Brian, what's wrong? Why aren't you saying anything? Are you sad? Lisa still had a self-righteous look on her face, thinking that she'd played the role of a heartless person as she spoke frantically. Han Shuo didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he watched Lisa speak conceited words to herself. He really didn't know how to respond, and finally froze for a while before shouting out in pain, Don't say any more. Pausing for a moment, Han Shuo saw that Lisa seemed to have been scared silly and hurriedly sighed, saying with a distressed expression, I understand in my heart. I only need to watch you silently from afar and won't bring you any trouble. If you like someone, then you shouldn't be a burden to them. You should consider everything for them wholeheartedly. Lisa, don't worry about it, really don't. I'll take good care of myself and silently bless you. Han Shuo had heard these words from a few third-rate soap operas, and when Han Shuo said them in succession, even Han Shuo felt goosebumps all over his body. He felt that he really was a bit too sinister and shameless. I've never heard anyone say such nice words before, boo-hoo. I'm sorry, Brian. Contrary to Han Shuo's expectations, Lisa actually started sobbing softly when she heard Han Shuo's words. Her tears flowed endlessly, and it looked like she was incredibly touched. At this time, Fanny walked over from the pool in the distance, her body dripping wet. Fanny's expression changed when she heard Lisa's sobs and she glared fiercely at Han Shuo, pouting coquettishly. Brian, haven't you bullied us enough? Boo-hoo. Master Fanny, it's not about Brian, it's just that I'm a bit scared when I think about what happened just now. It has nothing to do with him, really. Lisa hurriedly wiped away her tears when she saw Fanny blame Han Shuo and forced a smile as she explained. She looked suspiciously at Lisa, and then looked at Han Shuo, who was lying there stiffly, seemingly not moving at all. Fanny snorted lightly and said, I doubt he'll dare bully you again. Fanny had walked out of the pool, her clothes clinging tightly to her perfect body. Although nothing could be seen, her exquisite curves were still a feast for Han Shuo's eyes. He clicked his tongue in admiration. Not only was Fanny beautiful, but her figure was of the first class to commit crimes. It's a bit odd, the python's neck to its head has already been charred. I wonder what's going on. It looks like the python's quick death isn't solely due to the effects of my magic, but the charred state of its brain is the key. However, my bone spear magic doesn't have the miraculous effect of burning a person's body from the inside out. Just what is going on, Brian? Fanny looked Han Shuo up and down, and asked a bit oddly. Laughing dryly, Han Shuo hurriedly said, "Who knows? I only stabbed it a few times. I don't have the magic or fighting aura that can burn its body from the inside out. It's no use looking at me." "Is that really the case? Why do I feel that you're quite suspicious?" Fanny frowned and her bright eyes looked Han Shuo up and down, full of suspicion. Think what you want. I'd love to have such miraculous magic and fighting aura, but I don't have the strength." Han Shuo laughed heartily and said with a bit of self-deprecation, "The magical arts that he practiced weren't something that should exist in this world. This was a secret that would never be revealed to anyone, and this was something that Han Shuo would never admit even if he was beaten to death." "Master Fanny, you must be thinking too much, or perhaps you've seen wrong. Your eyes really aren't that good sometimes. Brian just saved us, why would he lie to us? Besides, if he was that strong, he wouldn't have needed to continue working as an errand slave a long time ago." "Perhaps." Fanny smiled faintly and nodded, saying happily afterwards, "We've obtained the magical beast core. Let's go, we can return to the tent. This swim was quite a close one, but we've really struck it rich with the third-level magical beast core. Brian, can you move now? Why don't I call one of the male students to carry you back?" Lisa looked at Han Shuo and said worriedly, "According to what I know, the deep-water venom python's poison mist will only temporarily paralyze the enemy and then make it easier for it to eat them. It's been so long, Brian, you should be fine by now, right?" Fanny snorted angrily and rolled her eyes at Han Shuo, speaking with a cold face. Han Shuo cried out in surprise when he heard these words. It really is like that. I can completely move now. Let's go, let's hurry back." Lisa started and then looked suspiciously at Han Shuo. She also said with a bit of anger, "Brian, you could move a long time ago?" Without the slightest bit of awkwardness, Han Shuo explained seriously. No, I only knew that I could move after hearing Master Fanny say so. Let's go. If we delay any longer, they'll be sure to worry about us." Han Shuo abruptly stood up and didn't wait for Fanny and Lisa to ask any more questions after he'd spoken. He rushed quickly towards the tents where the students had set up camp. "Damn it, he's been faking it all along. I found it out as soon as I tried. Brian, stop right there, I won't let you go." Fanny was exasperated as she yelled and pulled Lisa along, chasing after Han Shuo. Chapter 43. When Han Shuo whistled all the way to the tents where the students were camped, he suddenly noticed that Jean hadn't gone to sleep, but was instead sitting outside the tent, bored to death. Brian, have you seen Fanny and Lisa?" Jean immediately stood up and asked when he heard Han Shuo's footsteps. Nodding, Han Shuo said faintly, "I've seen them, Master Fanny and Lisa will be here soon. Master Jean, why haven't you gone to sleep yet?" "Oh, it's because Clark suddenly left for some business and asked me to apologize on behalf of Fanny." This Clark, he didn't give any reason and just left. It's a bit baffling." Han Shuo's thoughts raced when he heard Jean's words. He immediately understood that it must be because Clark's rash actions in the pool just now had angered Fanny and Lisa. Clark knew that he wouldn't be able to explain himself, so he left so abruptly. "I see. Master Jean, I still need to gather a few things nearby. When Master Fanny and Lisa arrive, tell them I'll be back before dawn." Han Shuo didn't care if Jean agreed or not after he'd spoken and quickly headed south, disappearing without a trace in the blink of an eye. Although Han Shuo's body wasn't stiff and powerless, he had been whipped by the deep-water venom python's tail earlier, and had indeed suffered some injuries. Han Shuo knew that when Fanny and Lisa returned, they would certainly come to pester him again. In this way, he wouldn't be able to use magical yuan to repair his body. Therefore, he might as well avoid them for now and wait until tomorrow, when the two's anger would have dissipated by at least half. At that time, there shouldn't be any problems. On a tall, towering tree in the south, Han Shuo sat cross-legged on a thick, lush, and leafy branch about 10 meters above the ground. He held his breath and concentrated, silently using magical yuan to refine his body over and over again. Time flowed by without him realizing it. Han Shuo's body, which had originally been in slight pain, slowly became less painful under the circulation of the magical yuan. Every inch of his skin, flesh, tendons, and bones seemed to be filled with a surging strength. As Han Shuo sank into a state of concentration, a faint trace of pain first radiated from his mind and then spread to his entire body. The violent pain suddenly exploded, forcing Han Shuo to howl in pain with 10 times the intensity of the pain. Crackling sounds of explosions rang out from Han Shuo's body, accompanied by Han Shuo's agonized howls. As these sounds rang out, strands of weak, turbid air leaked out from Han Shuo's pores. Han Shuo's skin rippled as if a stone had been thrown into the water's surface. When the pores had finished draining the turbid air and harmful substances from his body, a hazy ball of black light began to faintly encircle his body. This state continued for an unknown length of time before Han Shuo felt the pain all over his body suddenly disappear without a trace. He flew down from the 10-meter-tall tree with a thud, his body terrifyingly nimble and nimble. Success! He had finally broken through the first level of magical yuan, the solid realm. From now on, Han Shuo's body could be said to have been reborn. Whether it was strength, flexibility, or toughness, they had all far surpassed that of an ordinary person. After passing the most basic, solid realm, Han Shuo's future training was bound to yield twice the results with half the effort. With a single thought, the magical yuan flowed unimpeded, not only to his limbs, chest, and abdomen, but even to his head. Han Shuo looked at his exposed skin and saw that the scars that had been left on his body had now disappeared. His flesh was smooth and strong. Moving his body, Han Shuo could clearly feel that his height had increased by another centimeter or two. Lifting his head to look at the sky, Han Shuo discovered that it was still late at night. At this moment, Han Shuo was intoxicated by the joy of being reborn. He continuously circulated the magical yuan to his limbs and bones, excitedly feeling every change in his body. Suddenly, a thought struck Han Shuo as he remembered the pouch and jade box that he always carried with him. Last time, he had used the strange object in the jade box to meditate on his mental strength. In the end, his mental strength had almost been completely sucked away. Afterwards, because the magical yuan had flowed into his brain, he had averted the danger and reaped a great harvest. Now that he had broken through to the solid realm, Han Shuo could already autonomously mobilize the magical yuan and circulate it to any part of his body, including the brain, which was the most difficult to reach. Thinking back to the enormous benefits he had previously reaped, Han Shuo could no longer suppress the desire in his heart. He immediately sat down cross-legged and took out the pouch that he had kept close to his body. When he opened the box, the eyeball-like orb was still as strange and unfathomable as ever. As Han Shuo's mental strength began to slowly condense into the orb, the same thing that had happened last time repeated itself. The orb instantly emitted a misty green brilliance, with a drop of blood red within, giving off an oppressive and uncomfortable feeling. Han Shuo's mental strength rapidly flowed into the orb in the jade box, as if a whale was sucking in water. As the mental strength in his brain continuously flowed out, the pain in Han Shuo's brain became more and more intense. Finally, just as Han Shuo felt that his brain was about to explode, his thoughts moved and the magical yuan that had sunk into his lower abdomen suddenly flew to his brain. A rumble sounded in Han Shuo's brain, and as the pain intensified, Han Shuo instantly let out a wretched howl. At the same time, the surging mental strength rolled back like an avalanche, flooding Han Shuo's brain in an instant. But after thinking about it carefully, Han Shuo realized that he had no idea what was going on. Just as Han Shuo was at a loss and thinking hard, the orb in the jade box in his hand suddenly flew out of thin air. Lines of magic were outlined on the surface of the orb with green light. Han Shuo could feel a strong magical pulse instantly emanating from the void. As the orb shone with the green light, the magical pulse became more and more intense. After paying attention, Han Shuo suddenly noticed that the surrounding area where the green light shone was undergoing changes that made Han Shuo's jaw drop. Where the green light shone on the ground, the weeds and shrubs on the ground instantly disappeared without a trace, turning into a grayish-brown dry ground with piles of white bones on the ground. Some of the towering trees with lush branches and leaves on the side also underwent strange changes under the illumination of the green light, turning into the skeletons of some large undead creatures. If Han Shuo remembered correctly, those huge skeletons should be the most terrifying of the dark creatures, the bone dragons. Death. A desolate and empty expanse. Under the illumination of the green light, the entire area seemed to have instantly turned into an eternal and unchanging kingdom of the dead. There was a huge grayish-brown castle in the middle. Half of it was suspended in midair, while the other half was buried deep underground. Some strange, sharp thorns circled around the castle, and patterns of dark creatures were carved on all sides of the castle walls. Han Shuo looked at it in shock for a long time, and finally murmured in horror, This can't be the legendary Cemetery of Death, can it?" Chapter 44. The Cemetery of Death was the legendary holy land of necromancers, and also the extravagant hope of everyone on this trip to the dark forest. Han Shuo surveyed his surroundings and connected the dots to Fanny's description from before. He was already certain that this place was the Cemetery of Death that had been transported. No wonder Han Shuo had felt a vague sense of familiarity when he was here just now. This was all because Han Shuo had also trained in necromancy magic. There were strong magical pulses of the air of death in this area, as well as the scent of bones that had been transformed. These were all things that Han Shuo was extremely familiar with. Han Shuo furrowed his brow as he stared closely at the entire area. He thought to himself that those who had seen the Cemetery of Death in the legends would all die in the end. Now that he was standing here, should he go in or not? The Cemetery of Death had been a place where powerful necromancers had researched necromancy magic during their golden age. Afterwards, these mages had all died, and the Cemetery of Death had also disappeared without a trace. However, since this Cemetery of Death had once been a place where necromancers had researched, there must be some secrets of necromancy magic here. This was an enormous temptation for a rookie like Han Shuo who had just entered the halls of magic. Han Shuo had no choice but to seriously consider whether or not he needed to take the risk. After a while, Han Shuo's expression was resolute as he started to walk over the eerie white bones towards the Cemetery of Death. After Han Shuo had walked a few steps and entered the depths of the area, the dark green ball that had been suspended high in the air suddenly fell back into the jade box. The green light in the entire area instantly disappeared without a trace. Han Shuo started and looked around in shock. He discovered that the scene in the surrounding area that Han Shuo's eyes were looking at had once again changed, returning to the scene that he had seen when he had first arrived. However, the surrounding area of the Cemetery of Death, all the way to the soles of Han Shuo's feet, was still a gloomy scene of death. Looking at the round ball in his hand, Han Shuo understood that this ball was definitely a crucial item in the Cemetery of Death. It seemed to have the ability to open the Cemetery of Death. The entire Cemetery of Death seemed to be shrouded in a concealment barrier. If one looked at this area from the outside, they wouldn't be able to detect anything strange or peculiar. It wouldn't be able to attract anyone's attention. However, with this sphere, the true side of the Cemetery of Death could be revealed, and the entire cemetery of death would be shrouded in the desolate silence of reality. The eerie white bones beneath his feet creaked as he walked. The sudden appearance of this kind of sound in the deathly stillness of the surroundings made Han Shuo's hair stand on end. It was a good thing that Han Shuo's magical arts had just broken through to this solid realm. Only then did he have the courage to walk towards the cemetery of death without any hesitation. After a while, Han Shuo finally stood in front of the cemetery of death. He saw that there was a ring-shaped ravine in front of the door, with ink-black water flowing in it. A small bridge made of black threads and white bones stood alone on top of the ravine. Without hesitation, Han Shuo clutched the jade box with the round ball in his hand and treaded on the bone bridge, slowly walking towards the entrance of the cemetery of death. The bone bridge was swaying, causing Han Shuo's body to become a bit unsteady. He didn't know what was in the ravine below, but Han Shuo felt his hair stand on end when he saw it. He kept feeling that the ink-black water in the ravine was very dangerous. When Han Shuo walked onto the bone bridge, the round ball in the jade box started to emit a strange green light again. This seemed to be some kind of miraculous medicine that could calm the swaying. After the green light emitted from the round ball, the originally swaying bone bridge strangely stopped swaying. The connection between the black threads and the bones seemed to instantly become incomparably sturdy. Finally, Han Shuo arrived at the entrance. In front of the two large grayish-brown doors made of an unknown material, there were two tall evil knights and the skeletal remains of a war-horse on each side. Evil knights were extremely powerful existences among dark creatures. Without an archmage-level necromancer, one shouldn't even think of summoning evil knights. From the skeletal remains of the two evil knights in front of the door, and the shape of the war-horses, Han Shuo could already faintly tell that these two evil knights were the cream of the crop. The two grayish-brown doors had some complicated magical patterns on them. There was a circular groove at the intersection of the two doors. Judging from the shape of the groove, it seemed to be the key to open the door. At this moment, the dark green round ball in Han Shuo's hand suddenly shot out a beam of green light that went straight to the circular groove in the middle of the two doors. Han Shuo's heart moved and he immediately understood what was going on. He took the jade box without hesitation and placed the round ball against the groove, slowly embedding it. During this process, Han Shuo didn't touch the round ball with his hands. This was because Han Shuo knew that this round ball wasn't something simple. Even Han Shuo didn't know if there would be any negative changes if his skin or flesh came into contact with it. Therefore, he avoided touching it as much as possible. After the round ball had embedded itself into the groove, a rumbling sound rang out, and the door suddenly split open with a creak. The groove automatically split apart as the door opened. The round ball that had originally been inserted remained in the jade box without any changes. It was a patch of dusky darkness. Dust flew out from the inside as the door opened, causing Han Shuo to cough a few times before he calmed his mind and began to size up everything within. There was a large hall within the cemetery of death, and there were 6 rooms with closed doors around it. The entire hall was incomparably vast, with an oddly high ceiling that was the size of a basketball court. There was an enormous hexagram magic matrix in the middle that was about 80 to 90% similar to the one that Han Shuo had ridden in Zajowski City and the Academy of Magic and Force. There were a few simple and unadorned magical patterns drawn in the center of the hexagram magic matrix. Apart from the hexagram magic matrix, the surroundings of the hall were empty. There were only a few magic stone pillars that supported the enormous building, as well as some broken bones in the corners. There was a thick smell of decay in the air. Han Shuo stood in the doorway for a while and only slowly walked in after he felt the smell of decay slowly spread out with the opening of the door. Apart from the hexagram magic matrix, there was a tall ceiling and the 6 rooms with closed doors corresponding to the 6 corners of the hexagram. He walked in and searched the hall, but didn't find anything of value. Han Shuo immediately focused his attention on the 6 rooms with half-closed doors. 1, 2, 3. After searching all 6 rooms, Han Shuo still didn't find anything. From the shape of the 6 rooms, he could tell that they were only 6 warehouses, but there was nothing in the warehouses. Han Shuo's mind started to recall after he returned to the hall. From Fanny's words from last time to his observations of the outside, Han Shuo gradually recalled that only a small part of the cemetery of death was exposed to the surface. The majority of it was buried deep underground. The true secret must be hidden beneath the cemetery of death. However, after Han Shuo searched the entire hall and the 6 rooms, he didn't find any passageways or stairs that led underground. This greatly puzzled Han Shuo, and he sank into deep thought for a moment. After thinking for a long time, Han Shuo still felt that the ball in his hand was the key. He immediately stood up and circled the entire hall, including the 6 rooms. Finally, in the corner of one of the rooms, Han Shuo found another notch. After Han Shuo was overjoyed, he put the ball in. There was a rumbling sound, and the wall of the room suddenly tore open to reveal a dark passageway. On the first step of the passageway, there were 6 shiny silver rods made of a strange material that was neither stone nor wood. The 2 corners of each rod seemed to have joints, as if the 6 rods could be pieced together. Apart from the 6 rods, there was only a thin piece of paper with some scribbled words written in ancient magical characters. Han Shuo held the thin piece of paper. After reading the magical characters carefully, Han Shuo understood that the 6 magical rods could be pieced together to form a hexagram, and could be used to teleport directly to the magical formation in the hall. He also understood that there was a boundary at the entrance of the passageway, and that one wouldn't be able to enter without sufficient mental strength. Apart from this, Han Shuo didn't obtain any other useful information from the thin piece of paper. After thinking for a moment, Han Shuo put away the 6 magical rods, and started to walk down the passageway with a frown. A layer of invisible boundary suddenly appeared, and a green ripple flashed, abruptly sending Han Shuo flying. Han Shuo felt an abnormal headache during this process, and thought to himself that the words on the thin piece of paper were true. It must be because his mental strength was too weak that he couldn't enter the passageway to reach the underground building. Cursing under his breath, Han Shuo connected the 6 magical rods according to the records on the thin piece of paper, and then formed a hexagram on the ground. Afterwards, Han Shuo stood in the middle of the miniature magical formation, and infused his mental strength to activate it. Soon after, a white light flashed, and Han Shuo appeared in the middle of the spacious magical formation in the hall. Using the same method, Han Shuo infused his mental strength into the teleportation formation in the hall, and after activating it, he returned to the previous room, where he set up the miniature hexagram magical formation. Frowning and thinking for a moment, Han Shuo understood that he wouldn't be able to enter the passageway to investigate the situation within the cemetery of death for the time being. It was a good thing that he had obtained the 6 magical rods and the round ball, which allowed Han Shuo to enter this place from anywhere with great ease. This made Han Shuo extremely happy, and he was already treating this place as his secret base. Since he was temporarily unable to uncover the secrets of this place, Han Shuo didn't plan on staying any longer. After thinking for a while, he rolled up the 6 magical rods and carried them on his back. He also put the thin piece of paper into his pocket, and walked out of the cemetery of death with the jade box in his hand. When Han Shuo walked out safely and looked back, he discovered that the scene was exactly the same as when he first arrived. The towering weeds and shrubs, the lush trees that reached the sky, were still the same, and the surroundings were still deathly silent. With a satisfied smile on his face, Han Shuo understood that this trip to the dark forest could be considered to have come to an end for now. He had also discovered the legendary cemetery of death by sheer luck. The secrets of the cemetery of death would belong to him, and no one else, including the necromancy students and teachers. Chapter 45. After exiting the cemetery of death, Han Shuo retraced his steps back. However, the sky was already completely bright by the time he reached the halfway point. When Han Shuo arrived at his original encampment according to his memories, he discovered that the necromancy students had long since left. Just as Han Sho was about to curse out loud, he abruptly took note of his surroundings. He discovered that the traces of charcoal in the place where the bonfire had been kept didn't seem to be from last night, but rather from a few days later. There had been many resources stored in Han Sho's tent, but there was nothing left now. There were only a few stones piled up next to it, forming a triangle. His thoughts raced. Han Sho quickly walked to the tent and took out a dagger. He carefully fiddled with the stones and picked out a piece of yellow paper after a while. "Brian, we discovered traces of the 2 ogres in the vicinity the day after you left. We didn't wait for you because we were afraid that the ogres would come back for revenge. After you read this note, return to the academy on your own. Perhaps we'll meet on the way. I hope you're safe and sound. Fanny." The note had been left behind by Fanny. Han Sho slapped his head after reading it and cursed inwardly. After reading this note, Han Sho finally understood that a long time must have passed unknowingly when he'd been training his magical yuan. It definitely hadn't been just a day. It looked like the appearance of the 2 ogres had caused Fanny and the others to panic. Add to that the fact that they were deep south of the dark forest, and without Clark's protection, they had no choice but to return the way they'd come. Up until now, Han Sho's status as a slave hadn't been removed, and the woman Han Sho wanted was still within the academy, as well as some necromancy books. Han Sho wouldn't be able to leave the academy in the near future. With the 6 magic wands in hand, Han Sho could enter and exit the cemetery of death at will. When he returned to the academy, Han Sho could use the transportation matrix to make the cemetery of death his personal territory. He could use the entire southern part of the dark forest as a training ground in the future. Whether it was magical yuan or magical yuan training, it would yield twice the results with half the effort in such a place. After a moment's thought, Han Sho quickly ran out of the dark forest according to Fanny's instructions on the note. After a day of non-stop travel, Han Sho didn't feel the slightest bit tired. He weaved through the uneven paths of the dark forest. Han Sho's speed was as fast as lightning, as swift as a magical beast chasing its prey. Han Sho arrived at a place overgrown with rocks at dusk. Han Sho's group had camped here once before. Before Han Sho could approach this place, the sounds of metal clashing could be heard from afar. Han Sho's heart jumped. Could it be that Fanny and the others were being attacked by the ogres? When his thoughts traveled here, Han Sho's speed abruptly increased as he flew towards the area overgrown with rocks. Along the way, he encountered many forest troll with oily green skin, wielding knives, forks, and clubs. They continuously attacked Han Sho, but Han Sho easily dodged all of them. The forest troll was a race within the dark forest. This race was the mortal enemy of the elves, and had always been suppressed by the elves. Within the dark forest, the forest troll were even more frightening bandits than the ogres. Not only were they strictly disciplined, but they imitated the way humans use troops. They were divided into forest troll warriors, forest troll hunters, and forest troll priests who could use some simple magic. Legend had it that the forest troll had evolved from plants and trees. Like humans, they possessed high intelligence. Within the forest troll had a few unique advantages. They used these advantages to wantonly plunder the resources of other races within the forest, including the goods of some traveling merchants. They were as notorious as the ogres for being bandits. Han Sho listened carefully to the sounds of battle and quickly dashed forward according to the direction the sounds were coming from. As he sprinted, several long spears were thrown out by the forest troll hunters, whistling towards Han Sho's back. Han Sho's 5 senses were exceedingly sensitive as he sprinted. His ears twitched as his body repeatedly changed directions, easily dodging the long spears. A few troll warriors wielded large, sharp axes in their hands and shouted loudly as they rushed towards Han Sho from the side. However, before they'd even gotten close to Han Sho had already nimbly dashed past them and continued running towards the center of the battle. After tens of seconds of sprinting, Han Sho finally arrived at the center of the battle. He saw a line of a dozen or so people wielding long swords, defending against the attacks of the forest troll. The clothing of these dozen or so people clearly belonged to a certain mercenary group. Every one of them was riddled with scars, and it looked like they'd all sustained some sort of injury. There were dozens of forest trolls surrounding them. The troll warriors at the front were engaging in close combat, while the dozen or so troll hunters behind them continuously threw long spears and javelins. The last 5 forest troll priests were releasing simple healing magic and fire of the soul that strengthened the body, healing the injuries of the troll warriors and troll hunters and increasing their physical strength. Looking at the situation, the battle had already been going on for a while. The dozen or so human mercenaries had extraordinary combat abilities, but it was a pity that the forest troll had more people. There were also the troll hunters who threw long-range weapons, and the troll priests who healed and restored physical strength. These 3 combined to deal with the mercenaries that only consisted of warriors, and with their advantage in numbers, they obviously had the absolute advantage. Behind the mercenaries was a short, stocky fatty with a face full of fat. He cursed loudly as his bean-like eyes darted back and forth, as if searching for a way to escape. So it wasn't Fanny and the others. It looked like this had nothing to do with him. Han Sho thought for a bit, and immediately ignored the situation here. He didn't have any thoughts of drawing his sword and helping out, and directly planned on passing these people and continuing on his way out of the dark forest. Except, although Han Sho didn't have any thoughts of helping out, the forest troll didn't seem to want to let Han Sho go. A few particularly valiant troll warriors at the front had already raised their enormous battle axes and rushed towards Han Sho, throwing a few sharp javelins as well. "My apologies, I'm just passing by and will leave immediately. You guys continue to steal from them, it has nothing to do with me." When he saw the troll warriors rush over, Han Sho didn't want to cause unnecessary trouble. He suddenly called out loudly, planning on avoiding them and leaving. "Humans are the most cunning and evil of all races. Kill him!" The troll leader of the operation suddenly yelled out harshly in the common language of the continent, human language, next to the troll priests on the perimeter. The troll warriors who'd been momentarily stunned by Han Sho's words no longer hesitated when they heard their leader's orders. They raised their battle axes and rushed over. F***ck, they're asking for it. Han Sho was also a little angry. He just dodged a few spears when he saw the tall troll warriors rush over with battle axes. It was obvious that they were planning on taking care of him as well. Grabbing a spear beside him, Han Sho exerted force and grabbed the spear in his hand. Without waiting for the troll warriors to approach him, Han Sho had already flown up. The spear in his hand was as fast as lightning streaking through the air. There was a soft, poochy sound as the spear pierced through the chest of the first troll warrior. It even nailed the troll warrior that was nearer to him. The 2 troll warriors only had time to let out 2 miserable howls before they were pierced by the spear and died instantly. Casually grabbing the battle axe in the hands of one of the troll warriors, Han Sho yelled out, "If you're asking for it, then don't blame me." After experiencing the incident with the ogres last time, Han Sho no longer had the slightest bit of timidity when it came to killing people. There was even a faint, inexplicable sense of excitement. Towards these bandits and villains, Han Sho knew that kindness and begging for mercy were of no use. Only cruel and callous methods would be able to intimidate them. The more timid and weak you were, the more they wouldn't have any scruples. Thus, this time, Han Sho's actions were extremely vicious, and he faced them with ruthless slaughter. Indeed, after Han Sho's cruel methods were used, the other 4 troll warriors that had surrounded him revealed panicked expressions on their oily green faces. At the same time, they timidly took a few steps back. The forest troll leader looked at Han Sho with a bit of fear in his eyes, and a hesitant expression appeared on his face. "Brave warrior, I beg you to save me!" It was at this moment that the short fatty that had been blocked by the mercenaries suddenly yelled out in excitement. He looked at Han Sho with a fiery expression, as if Han Sho was his savior. "Not interested!" Han Sho flatly refused. He picked up the battle axe in his hands and planned to leave after a cold snort. When the short fatty saw that Han Shuo was about to leave, he immediately paled in fright and yelled out in a panic. "Brave warrior, if you can save me, I'm willing to pay handsomely and guarantee that you'll be satisfied." Han Shuo had already taken a few steps when these words were spoken. He suddenly stopped and turned to look at the fatty with a smile. "Honorable sir, how much are you willing to pay?" The fatty started and then hesitated for a moment. He clenched his teeth and stomped his feet, yelling out, 50 gold coins! I'm sorry, you should find someone else." Han Shuo thought to himself, if it was before, he might have really been tempted by 50 gold coins. But now that he'd entered the dark forest, Han Shuo had discovered that he was completely capable of capturing the Windblade wolves on his own. He no longer felt that 50 gold coins was worth the risk. When he saw that Han Shuo was about to leave, the fatty panicked and yelled out again. 70 at most! Han Shuo didn't even turn his head back as he continued walking forward. 80, 100, 120, 150, 200, 200. Han Shuo's walking body abruptly stopped as he suddenly turned around and quickly rushed back. He opened his mouth and said, "All right, 200 it is then. Count it as me taking a bit of a loss and making friends is fine." "Oh my gosh, 200 gold coins! You're robbing like them. 200 gold coins can buy dozens of slaves. Damn it, hurry up and save me!" the fatty yelled with a pained expression. Chapter 46. When Han Shuo arrived at the fatty's side, he noticed that the strongest of the dozen or so mercenaries behind the fatty were 2 journeyman warriors, followed by 6 beginner warriors, and a few trainee warriors. These people were all riddled with wounds, and the 2 strongest journeyman warriors had the most serious injuries. They'd almost lost all ability to fight by now. "Mr. Fabian, we're the ones who are protecting you." The journeyman warrior, who had a bloody hole in his ribs and was still dripping with fresh blood, couldn't help but reveal an anxious expression when he saw Han Shuo swiftly approach. He spoke to the short, stocky fatty. "The situation now is quite obvious. You've already lost all ability to fight and are unable to provide effective protection for me. I've already paid half of the gold coins to your mercenary band before, but because you haven't been able to safely escort me back to the Empire, I won't be paying the remaining half." Fabian spoke with a face full of resignation, and then a genial smile hung on his face. He bowed to Han Shuo and said, "Brave warrior, please take me away from here. I'll pay you 200 gold coins." "All right, give me 100 gold coins first and I'll start immediately." Han Shuo was unperturbed and also smiled as he spoke. At this moment, the troll leader saw that Han Shuo didn't seem to have any intentions of leaving. He finally roared out in fury, "Crafty evil human, kill them all!" The troll warriors, hunters, and priests, who had been standing there blankly a moment ago, once again yelled out a few strange words in the forest troll's language as soon as the troll leader's words had sounded. "All right, here's 100 gold coins. I'll give you another 100 gold coins when you take me away safely from here. Damn it, they're already charging over, you better hurry up and move." Fabian hastily took out a money pouch and poured out 100 gold coins, handing it to Han Shuo as he watched the forest troll charge over with a sinister expression and a weapon in his hand. As soon as the 100 gold coins were in his hands, Han Shuo suddenly smiled and rushed towards Fabian. Before Fabian could react, Han Shuo had already carried him on his back and pulled out a few strips of gauze from an open pocket on the side, tightly wrapping them around Fabian's back without any explanation. "Let's go. I'll bring you out of here safely. You must hold on tight to me. Don't blame me if you fall off on your own," Han Shuo hurriedly ordered. He threw away the battle axe in his hand and grabbed a spear from the side. Then, he suddenly rushed towards the periphery. 7 troll warriors had long since blocked the way. Behind them were some troll hunters and 2 troll priests. As soon as they saw Han Shuo rush over, their spears and javelins had already been thrown out, whistling towards Han Shuo. Even with a fatty on his back, Han Sho still seemed very relaxed as he maneuvered through the rugged path. Nimbly changing directions, Han Sho easily dodged a few spears and javelins. When Han Sho had rushed to the side of the 7 troll warriors, the troll warriors, who had been waiting for a long time, rushed over with large strides, wielding their battle axes. Tightly gripping a spear in his hand, Han Sho's body swiftly closed in, the spear stabbing towards the chest of the first troll warrior. A flower of blood suddenly blossomed on his chest as the troll warrior's body trembled and fell backwards. At this moment, the troll priest in the back started chanting healing and fire of the soul magic. Several streaks of green light were cast onto the troll warriors. The troll warrior that had fallen earlier stood up shakily. After the other troll warriors had been covered by the magic of the fire of the soul, their originally hard green skin seemed to have been coated with a layer of iron. It actually flashed with a kind of metallic luster. Then their speed and strength increased at the same time, and they rushed over with loud roars. "Hurry, hurry up and get me out of here!" Fabian was pale with fright as he cried out frantically on Han Sho's back. The expression on his face didn't change as Han Sho turned a deaf ear to Fabian's screams. The spear in his hand was suddenly thrown out, piercing the troll warrior that had shakily stood up through the neck and nailing him to the ground. He then pulled out the spears and javelins that had been stabbed into the ground and threw them one by one at the priests hiding in the back. A troll priest couldn't dodge in time and was pierced to death on the spot by the javelins. 2 other troll hunters were also pierced through the chest and died. At this moment, Han Sho casually pulled out a spear and began to fend off the troll warriors that had already arrived in front of him. The fire of the soul magic had been cast on the troll warriors, and all of their bodily functions had received an upgrade. However, Han Sho's magical training had been somewhat successful, and the toughness and agility of his body still far exceeded theirs. As he danced with his spear, he flicked the battle axes into the air. During this process, the troll warriors would also pull out the javelins and spears that had been stabbed into the ground after their battle axes had slipped and flown out of their hands, firmly blocking the way as they tangled with Han Sho. With a fatty on his back, Han Sho was fighting 1 against 6. Even though he was able to dodge very quickly, he still couldn't completely deflect all of the damage. Whenever danger approached, Han Sho would very evilly use Fabian on his back as a shield, using Fabian's fat body to minimize the damage on his own body. "Damn it, you can't do this! Otherwise, don't even think about getting the next 100 gold coins!" Fabian's butt had been pierced by a spear, and a few bloody wounds had also appeared on his back from the javelins. He continuously cried out in panic on Han Sho's back. It was a pity that Han Sho had already completely ignored Fabian's complaints. He pulled out the spear that had been stabbed into the chest of a troll warrior, and fresh blood suddenly sprayed out, spraying all over Han Sho's body. Han Sho's expression was already sinister and severe to begin with, and he looked even more like the reincarnation of the Grim Reaper after being sprayed with fresh blood. Fabian, on the other hand, immediately froze in shock and didn't dare say anything else. He only sobbed on Han Sho's back. "Kill him! Kill him! Let's go together!" When the troll leader saw that Han Sho had killed quite a few forest troll in a row, he suddenly roared in rage. Even he himself raised a battle axe and rushed over from behind. Now, Han Sho was fighting 1 against 5. Although it didn't seem particularly strenuous for him, it was still very difficult for him to charge out of the encirclement of the 5. When the troll leader's words fell and more troll warriors rushed over, Han Sho dodged the attack of a battle axe and took a few steps back. "Fallen warriors of the dead, heed the Dark Herald's call and reveal your existence!" Han Sho suddenly chanted the undead summoning incantation as he spread his hands. "Oh my gosh, you're actually a mage as well!" Fabian, who had been sobbing softly, was instantly dumbfounded when he saw that Han Sho had actually chanted a magical incantation. He looked at Han Sho with a confused expression, and let out a strange cry. The troll leader in the distance was also shocked, and then rushed over even faster, roaring loudly. "Kill him! Hurry and kill him! The little skull wielding the bone dagger suddenly appeared in front of Han Shuo. Its thin and small body stood there all by itself, and its empty eyes scanned the surroundings blankly. No way, why is it just a little skull, and such a skinny one at that? What's the use of this? Fabian couldn't help but cry out in alarm when he saw that Han Shuo had only summoned a skeleton. Waha, so it's just a skeleton. That gave me a fright, kill them! When the troll leader realized that it was just a little skull after his initial shock, he immediately started jeering and ordering the forest troll warriors to quickly approach. Han Shuo's eyes were cold, and the corners of his mouth also curved into a mocking smile. He immediately gave the little skull the order to attack as soon as the troll leader's words fell. When the little skull received Han Shuo's order to attack, its calf bones bent and straightened, and it suddenly shot out like a sharp sword. The bone dagger in its hand drew a dark streak of light through the air, flying out first. With a puchi, the troll warrior that had rushed over first was directly pierced through the forehead by the bone dagger like a piece of paper, and fell backwards stiffly. The little skull didn't stop after it pierced through the skull of a troll warrior. It whistled through the air under the control of the little skull, as if it were a ghost seeking death. It made an ear-splitting howl as it moved in a mysterious and unpredictable arc, piercing through two troll warriors in a row. When the little skull neared these troll warriors, it automatically returned to the little skull's hand. The moment the bone dagger left his hand, 3 troll warriors had lost their lives in the blink of an eye. After the little skull's attack, the extremely disappointed Fabian and the loudly mocking troll leader were both dumbfounded. They stared closely at the little skull, who was like a tiger entering a flock of sheep, in disbelief. The little skull grasped the bone dagger in his hand and nimbly began to reap the lives of the troll warriors. Oh my gosh, am I seeing things? Is this really just a skeletal warrior? Fabian finally reacted and screamed in excitement. If it wasn't for the gauze wrapping around him, he might have fallen to the ground from the excitement. Don't go near him. Everyone, stay away from that skeleton. Use spears, javelins, and battle axes to kill that little skull. After the shock, the troll leader commanded loudly with a face full of fear. His originally approaching body stopped abruptly, and he began to retreat timidly. The troll warriors that were still close to the little skull all retreated. As soon as they left, the sky full of spears, javelins, and battle axes of the troll warriors flew out at the same time, smashing and stabbing towards the little skull. Han Shuo was startled and thought that no matter how strong the little skull was, he would probably be hit by such a fierce barrage of attacks. It would be too late even if he chanted the incantation to withdraw the dagger now. Han Shuo was secretly anxious and began to truly worry for the little skull. However, the little skull's unimaginably flashy performance completely overturned Han Shuo's knowledge and understanding of him. When the forest trolls heard this, they all began to flee for their lives in all directions like stray dogs. Even the forest troll leader from before didn't utter a single word as he fled without a care in which direction he went. The development of a situation was always so unexpected. Han Shuo, who had only planned on breaking through the encirclement and escaping, hadn't expected that the 7 bone spurs of Little Skull would have such terrifying power. By the time Han Shuo had come to his senses, apart from a dozen or so forest troll corpses, there wasn't a single living forest troll left. Wahahaha, good boy, good boy! Han Shuo suddenly felt a sense of relief and couldn't help but laugh wildly. At the same time, the 7 bone spurs circled once in the air and accurately returned to the Little Skull's back. Little Skull then bent his legs and raised the bone dagger in his hand, starting to loot the first forest troll's corpse with practiced ease, taking away everything apart from the clothes on their bodies. Give it to me, the other 100 gold coins! Putting Fabian down, Han Shuo had a faint smile on his face as he asked for the rest of the reward from the dumbfounded Fabian. At this moment, Fabian's gaze was still roving over the little skull's body, and he only reacted when Han Shuo's voice sounded. Fabian was about to take out the gold coins when he suddenly thought of something and glared at Han Shuo. No way. You used me as a shield when you were fighting the forest troll just now. Your actions have completely harmed your employer's interests, and you still want the other 100 gold coins? Han Shuo's face instantly grew cold as his cold gaze roved over Fabian's body. He casually pulled out a javelin beside him and said faintly, Mr. Fabian, are you trying to renege on your debt? On the other side, the little skull, who was collecting the spoils of war, also suddenly stopped and looked at Fabian with its empty eye sockets. Fabian suddenly felt a chill run down his spine and his heart trembled. He hastily squeezed out a smile and backed up a few steps, saying, Just kidding, just kidding. Heh heh ha ha. Here's 100 gold coins, not a single one less. Thank you for your hard work. Putting away the 100 gold coins, Han Shuo gave a faint and didn't waste any more words. A carefree feeling rose in his heart as he thought to himself that he was indeed successful in every endeavor when he had unyielding strength. Honorable warrior, the items on those forest trolls' bodies, mine, they're all mine. Han Shuo had already cut off Fabian's words before he'd even finished speaking, taking those items as his spoils of war as a matter of course. Forcing out an awkward laugh, Fabian said repeatedly, Of course, they're all yours. What I meant was that I can buy the items that were looted from the forest trolls' bodies. Creasing his brow, Han Shuo looked suspiciously at Fabian and then hung a smile on his face again. He mimicked Clark and bowed courteously, saying, Mr. Fabian means that you plan on using gold coins to buy these items? This face sure changes quickly. Fabian cursed inwardly and nodded with a similar smile on his face. Indeed, I'm a merchant. I enter and exit the dark forest in order to purchase some items from the dark forest, and then bring them back to the Empire for profit. The forest troll are notorious bandits in the dark forest. They should have some things that I need on their bodies. If you don't mind, warrior, I plan on buying them. At this moment, the little skull silently walked to Han Shuo's side with 8 bags hanging from his 2 hand bones. Under Han Shuo's orders, the little skull put down the 8 bags and used the bone dagger in his hand to open them one by one. Han Shuo also placed the items from his journey on the ground and looked at Fabian, awaiting his valuation. 8 magicite cores of magical beasts of the 5th rank, 6 of the 4th rank, and 1 of the 3rd rank. 3 windblade wolf pelts, 3 venomous lizard fangs, 1 young deep-water venom python egg, and 5 stalks of moon-feeder grass. I can pay you 1,000 gold coins for all of these, how about it? Fabian silently calculated after categorizing these items and lifted his head to smile at Han Shuo. Shaking his head, Han Shuo said sarcastically, Not much. The deep-water venom python is a level 3 magical creature. Just one of its eggs should be worth quite a bit, not to mention the core of a level 3 magical creature. Do you think I'm an idiot by only offering 1,000 gold coins? Han Shuo knew that the price of a level 3 magical creature wouldn't be low. Because he didn't know the exact price, Han Shuo hadn't clearly stated the exact number of gold coins. However, it was inevitable that the merchant's asking price would be far lower than the market price. Therefore, Han Shuo naturally wouldn't let him take it so easily. The deep-water venom python is a level 3 magical creature, but the chances of nurturing a deep-water venom python from its egg are pitifully small, and it might not even recognize its master. Therefore, the price can't be too high. How about this? I'll offer 1,500 gold coins, what do you think? Han Shuo didn't say anything and only looked at Fabian with a slight smile. 2,000 gold coins, that's my bottom line. If you really aren't willing to sell, then forget it. I'll leave right now. Fabian gritted his teeth and finally raised the price by another 500 gold coins. Seeing that it was about right, Han Shuo chuckled lightly and said faintly, 2,000 it is. The items are yours now. Where are the gold coins? These items would definitely be worth more than this if they were brought to the Empire. However, Han Shuo was still in the dark forest right now and didn't have a space ring. It wouldn't be convenient to bring these items with him. In addition, Han Shuo's identity was only an errand slave of the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force. It would be difficult to deal with him once he arrived in the Empire. It would be more convenient and direct to hand it over to Fabian. This is a crystal card with 2,000 gold coins on it. Take this crystal card and you can exchange it for gold coins at any savings merchant. Oh, right, what's your name? I can help you print your name onto the crystal card. Fabian took out a thin golden crystal card and asked Han Shuo. Brian. Oh, all right, Brian. After Fabian took out the crystal card, he also took out something that looked like a thin needle and lightly drew it across a thin slit in the corner of the crystal card. A faint golden light flickered and the crystal card returned to normal. Han Shuo had been in this world for a period of time. After purposefully understanding this world, he understood that crystal cards were like the bank cards of his original world. Gold, silver, and copper coins were all items with weight. No one could carry thousands upon thousands of gold coins on their person. This kind of crystal card was a necessity for nobles. It could be used to store and withdraw gold coins from the ubiquitous savings merchants of the Empire. Here you go, Brian. From now on, this crystal card is yours. Fabian smiled faintly after handing the crystal card to Han Shuo. He looked at Han Shuo and said, I'm Fabian, a member of the Empire's Buzz Merchant Guild. If you have anything to sell or buy in the future, you can find me at the Buzz Merchant Guild. This is my address, keep it safe. The Buzz Merchant Guild was one of the largest merchant guilds in the Empire, and was controlled by the Buzz family. Even with Han Shuo's ignorance and inexperience, he had heard of some of the Buzz Merchant Guild's remarkable abilities. Now that he heard Fabian's words, Han Shuo immediately put away the hard piece of paper that Fabian had handed over and said with a smile, Mr. Fabian, it's a pleasure to meet you. Perhaps there really will be a time when I'll need your help in the future. The forest troll won't dare disturb you anymore. Our business ends here, goodbye. Han Shuo didn't say anything else after he'd finished speaking. He gave the little skull an order, and the man and the skeleton quickly disappeared into the distance. Hey, brave mercenaries, I think our business can continue. Fabian couldn't help but cheer when he saw Han Shuo suddenly leave. He walked towards the mercenaries who were tending to their wounds in the distance. Chapter 48. After leaving Fabian, Han Shuo headed straight for the outskirts of the dark forest, taking the same paths he had taken before. Han Shuo continued to train his magical yuan along the way. After his body had been reconstructed in the solid realm, Han Shuo could be said to have been reborn anew. His training in magical yuan was now fruitful, and his magical yuan could circulate to all parts of his body as he willed it. There were 9 levels to training in magical yuan, and Han Shuo had now reached the 2nd level. Opening the meridians. The training of opening the meridians was a bit different from the solid realm. It mainly focused on the process of expanding the meridians of the entire body, greatly increasing the width and toughness of the meridians. Every time he trained, the process of opening the meridians was extremely painful, as if there were bugs gnawing at his meridians. The first 3 levels of demonic magic, the solid body, the opening of the meridians, and the molded spirit were the most basic parts. The further one progressed, the more difficult it would be to train. However, with the experience of training in the solid realm, Han Shuo had already understood that the training of demonic magic was accompanied by pain and inhuman torture. The inhuman pain of the opening of the meridians level was also within his expectations. He harnessed his unyielding will and used his magical yuan to expand his meridians over and over again. After 12 days of training and hurrying on his way, Han Shuo didn't run into Fanny and the others along the way. He finally walked out of the dark forest alone and once again arrived at the town of Droll in the evening. Compared to a month ago, Han Shuo's strength, spirit, and appearance had all undergone tremendous changes after experiencing the trials of the dark forest. Han Shuo was now a bit over 1.7 meters tall. Although his body wasn't very muscular, he no longer appeared thin and weak. After the baptism of fresh blood, Han Shuo's courage and knowledge had all greatly increased. His entire temperament had also undergone some mysterious changes. Han Shuo himself didn't even know that he was slowly changing. At dusk, the town of Drol was brimming with a relaxed and cheerful atmosphere. Many adventurers had returned from the dark forest. Some had faces full of sorrow after losing their companions, while others had satisfied smiles on their faces after obtaining abundant items. They planned on spending a good time in the town of Drol. When Han Shuo returned to the town of Drol, he first went to where Jean and the others had stored their war horses. Han Shuo observed from afar and discovered that the war horses they'd rented from the military were still there. He immediately understood that Fanny and the others hadn't returned to the town of Drol yet. Although they'd spent gold coins on the war horses, the necromancy teachers and students still only had the right to use them. They still had to return the war horses to the city guards of Zajoski when they'd returned to Drol. Since the war horses were still there, this meant that Fanny and the others hadn't left yet. Han Shuo naturally knew that he would be much faster than Fanny and the others if he'd hurried on without stopping. Perhaps Fanny and the others would encounter magical creatures along the way and be delayed. Therefore, it was within Han Shuo's expectations that Fanny and the others hadn't returned. When he arrived at the small hotel that Fanny and the others had stayed in, Han Shuo walked up to the owner's counter and said with a slight smile, "I'd like to stay." The shopkeeper was squinting his eyes as he ate his fruit. He lifted his head to look at Han Shuo and said lazily, It's you. Give me 10 copper coins. That storeroom is always empty. You can go over now." Last time, when Han Shuo had come with Jean and the others, Jean had specially rented a warehouse for Han Shuo and had been looked down upon by the owner. Therefore, when the owner saw that it was Han Shuo, he naturally assumed that with Han Shuo's status, he could only rent that warehouse. Not angry, Han Shuo smiled faintly and took out the money pouch from his waist. He shook it with a clatter and poured out a gold coin onto the round wooden table. He flicked a glance at the owner and said, "I don't want to stay in the warehouse." The owner, who had been lazy just a moment ago, suddenly sat up with a whoosh and picked up the gold coin on the round table. A professional smile quickly appeared on his face and he said loudly, Of course. How could a warehouse be worth 1 gold coin? Cute little fellow, just tell me which room you'd like to stay in. 1 gold coin is only more, no less." The treatment of gold coins was completely different indeed. Han Shuo smiled faintly and nodded. "I'd like the room that the female teacher stayed in last time. You make the arrangements." No problem at all. "Here's the key, 1 gold coin is enough for you to stay there for 5 days. Do you have any other requests, little fellow?" The owner was all smiles as he merrily took out a key from the drawer behind the table and handed it to Han Shuo, asking with a flattering tone, "Nothing else, go back to your work." Han Shuo took the key and headed straight for the room that Fanny had stayed in before. He thought to himself that the power of money had the same miraculous effects no matter which world he was in. It looked like gold coins were the most indispensable thing in order to establish a foothold in this world. When he arrived at the room that Fanny had stayed in before, Han Shuo put down his belongings and took a nice, hot bath in the bathtub. Thinking back to his encounter with Fanny last time, Han Shuo felt a wave of flames, steaming, out of his body. His lower body was already uncontrollably becoming hard. Cursing inwardly, Han Shuo stood up completely naked and picked up a dry towel from the side to wipe his body. He was about to leave the bathroom when he saw his well-built body in the large mirror on the side. In the mirror, Han Shuo's muscles bulged and his body was well proportioned. His skin had taken on a bronze color after this period of exposure to the sun, looking healthy, powerful, and full of masculinity. It was a world of difference from his previous frail and skinny self. Pinching his chest muscles that were neither too big nor too small, he struck a few poses in front of the mirror. Han Shuo narcissistically pointed at his reflection in the mirror and praised, "Little fellow, you're quite handsome." After leaving the hotel, Han Shuo first went to the clothing store and spent 1 gold coin to purchase a set of soft, first-rate underwear. He wore it under the errand boy uniform that the academy had previously distributed. Afterwards, Han Shuo went to the weapons store and spent 10 gold coins to purchase a dagger of even better quality. He spent 4 gold coins to buy 15 sharp steel needles to pin to his thighs, and 6 gold coins to buy a miniature crossbow to hide in his sleeves, fully arming his body. Afterwards, Han Shuo went to the medicine store and took out 40 gold coins to buy some potions and powders. Apart from some simple medical supplies, there were also some anesthetic and hallucinogenic aphrodisiac powders, and a bottle of poison. Some of these things were prohibited from being sold in the Empire's Asan city. Even if Han Shuo had the money and didn't have the connections, he still wouldn't be able to get his hands on them. However, in the town of Droll, they could be openly sold because adventurers needed them. Since Han Shuo had come here, and now that he understood the importance of strength, he naturally had to buy some in case he needed them in the future. After all these things were in his hands, Han Shuo finally sighed with emotion at how good it felt to be rich. After walking out of the medicine store, even Han Shuo's spine was straighter than usual. With gold coins in his purse, it seemed that everything suddenly went smoothly. On the way to the hotel, Han Shuo's stomach churned when he saw a few big and small taverns with bright lights. Afterwards, Han Shuo complied with his body's needs and turned into one of the taverns. The tavern was extremely noisy and the neon lights flickered chaotically on the roof. A few adventurers and merchants gathered in groups of 3 to 5 on the tables and chairs in the hall, talking loudly about their adventures. These people's faces were flushed red and they held wine cups in their hands, shouting and chatting without the slightest scruple in their drunken stupor. Delicacies were placed everywhere on the tables, and a few young male and female attendants shuttled back and forth among them, serving them fine wine and dishes. Han Shuo walked straight to the only empty table in the corner of the hall and sat down. A bashful young attendant quickly walked in front of Han Shuo and asked politely, "Excuse me, what would you like?" "Good wine, good meat, give me some." Han Shuo took out a gold coin and flicked his thumb onto the attendant's plate, casually opening his mouth to instruct. When the attendant saw the gold coin land, his eyes immediately lit up and he bowed even more respectfully. Without batting an eyelid, he put away the gold coin and said softly with a smile, "All right, please wait a moment, it will be served immediately." Since he had a gold coin, he should enjoy it to the fullest. Han Shuo leaned lazily against his chair and narrowed his eyes as he sized up the various adventurers and merchants in the hall. Some of them had just returned from the dark forest, while others were about to enter. Some had just escaped danger, while others were planning on entering unknown dangers. All of them were letting loose their inhibitions and releasing their energy, thoroughly enjoying the depravity of the town of Droll. After a while, a bottle of light purple wine, 3 large plates of roasted meat, and 2 plates of fruits were delivered to Han Shuo's table by the bashful attendant. "This is purple Leilon, the most famous wine in the town of Droll. All adventurers love to drink this. I hope you will be satisfied." The attendant pointed at the bottle of light purple wine and introduced it after setting down the items, then bowed and retreated. Han Shuo couldn't wait any longer, as he grabbed the roasted meat and started wolfing it down. Although the taste wasn't as delicious as when he roasted it himself, it was still pretty good. Twisting open the bottle, a large mouthful of purple Leilon flowed down his throat. The luscious sweetness carried a hint of fiery heat, and the mellow aftertaste lingered in his mouth after entering his stomach, giving Han Shuo a different kind of enjoyment. "Good wine indeed," Han Shuo praised. When he lifted his head to look around, he suddenly saw 2 familiar faces walk in from the doorway, Claude and Irene. Claude and Irene looked around, as if searching for an empty seat. Their gazes fell upon Han Shuo at the same time. After a moment of surprise, they actually started walking in Han Shuo's direction at the same time. Chapter 49. Isn't this the necromancy major's errand boy? Claude walked up to Han Shu and looked at Han Shu in surprise, frowning as he spoke. Necromancy errand boy Brian, I didn't think I'd run into the two of you here. Han Shu nodded and drank another mouthful of purple Leilon, responding with a slight smile. It looks like there aren't any seats left. Claude, why don't we go somewhere else to eat? Irene swept her gaze over Han Shu with a trace of disgust in her eyes. No need, many of the taverns in Droll should be packed at this time. There's only one seat for Brian anyways, and since we're all from the academy, I think Brian wouldn't mind if we sat down. Isn't that right, Brian? Claude smiled faintly at Irene and then stared merrily at Han Shu. Of course, if you don't think that sitting with an errand boy like me is beneath your dignity, I'd be very happy to sit with you. Claude had injured his little skull in order to curry favor with Irene last time. Perhaps Claude hadn't taken this matter to heart, but Han Shu had silently noted it down. Now that his strength had increased, Han Shu had less and less scruples in his actions. He'd been fretting about how he couldn't take revenge on Claude, but now that he delivered himself to his doorstep, of course he wasn't going to let him go. I hate those from the necromancy major, and errand boys are no exception. Irene frowned and flicked a glance at Claude, saying coldly. Claude started and then shot a meaningful glance at Irene, smiling faintly at Han Shu. Brian, weren't you with the necromancy major? How come I don't see them, and you're the only one here? Oh, to think that an errand boy like you would be able to enjoy such sumptuous food and fine wine. How surprising! Irene also looked at Han Shu in surprise after hearing Claude's words. She seemed to be very concerned about Claude's question, and was in no hurry to leave. Claude noticed Erin's interest and politely wiped the dust off the chair in front of her. After gesturing for Erin to sit down, he calmly sat down and looked at Han Shu. Tearing apart the roasted meat in his hand, Han Shu sent it into his stomach as if nothing had happened. He took another gulp of wine and burped. He rubbed his stomach in satisfaction and said with a smile, Master Fanny and the others should be back soon. They were afraid that I would drag them down, so they gave me some gold to wait for them here. Is there a problem? No. So that's what happened. By the way, Brian, how was your harvest this time? Did you hunt any high-level magical beasts? Claude asked Han Shu with a smile, winking at Irene again. Irene revealed an attentive expression and also looked at Han Shu, seeming to be quite concerned about the necromancy major's harvest. Shaking his head, Han Shu said, I don't know, I returned midway. I don't know if they had any great harvests, but I think they've gained quite a bit this time. Humph. What harvest could they possibly have with those people? At most, they could hunt some 5th-level magical beasts. I'm afraid they'd have a hard time killing 4th-level magical beasts. Irene looked disdainfully at Han Shu and snorted coldly. Han Shu only flicked a faint glance at Irene's mockery and didn't say much. Claude had already called over a waiter at this time and also used a gold coin to purchase some wine and meat. Han Shu was thinking about how he could retaliate against Claude. After thinking for a while, a trace of an evil smile appeared on his lips. He threw a banana peel from the plate in front of him at his feet without batting an eyelid. When a waiter quickly walked over with a plate, Han Shu pushed off with the tip of his right foot and the peel suddenly flew out from under the table. The waiter quickly walked over with the plate in his hand. He stepped on the peel of the fruit and staggered forward with a cry of surprise. The plate in his hand suddenly flew out and landed on Claude and Erin's backs. Claude and Irene moved upon hearing the noise and suddenly turned around. Claude's right hand suddenly raised high and blocked the plate that was flying towards him. At the same time, Han Shu's left hand shot out like lightning and flicked his pinky. The gray-white psychedelic aphrodisiac powder had already soundlessly landed at the bottom of Claude's wine cup. Be careful when you walk. Claude frowned at this moment and passed the plate in his right hand to the waiter who'd stood up again after falling down. He spoke with displeasure. Thank you, noble knight. I will definitely be careful in the future. The waiter took the plate from Claude's hand with trepidation and quickly left after bowing. Han Shu was unperturbed and lowered his head as he held his wine cup, drinking as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't noticed what had just happened. Claude and Irene didn't say anything else to Han Shaw afterwards. Claude chatted attentively with Irene and drank cup after cup of purple Leylon mixed with psychedelic aphrodisiac powder. Irene's expression was cold as she responded to Claude in a half-hearted manner. It looked like she hadn't accepted Claude's affection yet. "Enjoy your meal, I still have matters to attend to and will be leaving first." Han Shaw saw Claude drink a few cups of purple Leylon and knew that the psychedelic aphrodisiac powder must have already been absorbed by Claude. He immediately stood up and spoke. Claude and Irene had always looked down on Han Shaw to begin with, and didn't think much of a minor errand boy like him. They wanted nothing more than for Han Shaw to leave as soon as possible so that he wouldn't be an eyesore to them. When Han Shaw had spoken thus, the two waved their hands at the same time, indicating that Han Shaw should leave earlier. After drinking a bit of wine, the disdain on their faces was no longer concealed. After leaving the tavern with a faint smile, Han Shaw stood alone in a street corner next to the tavern and waited for a while. Claude's face was flushed red as he walked out shoulder to shoulder with the slightly blushing Irene and headed towards the north of the town of Droll. The sky was already dark at this time, and the town of Droll was brightly lit. It was the busiest time of the day. Groups of adventurers and merchants drunkenly yelled as they passed by. Han Shaw silently followed behind the two and saw them enter a luxurious tavern. He then stood on the side of the street, waiting to watch them make a fool of themselves. From what Han Shaw had observed just now, Claude probably hadn't moved Irene's heart yet. If, at this time, Claude, under the influence of the psychedelic aphrodisiac powder, did anything improper to her, he would definitely be beaten up by Irene. Clutching a handful of fruits in his hand, Han Shaw ate leisurely as he thought viciously. After a while, there was still no movement from within the tavern. Just as Han Shaw grew a bit impatient from waiting, Claude suddenly walked out of the tavern with a flushed face and hurried steps towards the street. Han Shaw's heart jumped. He hadn't thought that Claude's willpower would be so strong, and that he hadn't completely lost his reason even now. But looking at Claude's current appearance, Han Shaw knew that he wouldn't be able to hold on much longer. He hurriedly followed Claude's footsteps from a distance. Indeed, he'd only walked a dozen or so meters when an older woman with heavy makeup and revealing clothing waved at him. Claude couldn't hold on any longer, and huffed heavily as he made his way into the alleyway. It looked like he was planning on taking care of his physical needs nearby. "Eh? Was that Claude just now?" A cry of surprise came from the side of the street. Han Shaw turned his head to look, and was suddenly overjoyed. He thought to himself that the heavens were helping him. He saw the light major teacher, Beecher, pass by with a few light major students. One of the sharp-eyed female students just happened to see Claude and the seductive, revealing woman make their way into the alleyway and couldn't help but cry out in surprise. "No way, how could Claude be this kind of person? He's a noble knight, and wouldn't come to a place like this to fool around. Besides, Claude is currently pursuing Irene, so it's even more impossible that he would do this." Beecher furrowed his brow and said doubtfully, not quite believing it. "It really is him, I'm sure I didn't see wrong. If you don't believe me, let's go in and take a look." The female student who had spoken before thought for a moment, and said with certainty, "Let's go, Katie, this isn't your business. Don't be a busybody." Beecher was silent for a moment, and urged the students to leave quickly. Katie looked angrily at the alleyway, thought for a moment and stomped her feet. "How can this be? I'll go tell Irene right now. If Claude isn't in the room right now, then it must be him. I won't allow Claude to deceive Irene's feelings." Katie ran off with a huff as soon as she'd finished speaking and sped towards the hotel where Irene was staying. The other light major students looked at each other when they saw Katie leave and didn't know what to do for a moment. Han Shaw almost couldn't restrain himself from laughing out loud. He hadn't thought that things would be so coincidental. Han Shaw had originally planned on making a move himself and thinking of ways to trick Irene into coming here. He hadn't thought that Claude's luck would be so bad. It looked like it would be difficult for him not to be unlucky today. After a while, a frosty Irene and a fuming Katie quickly walked over from afar. One could tell from Irene's expression that she was absolutely furious. Claude had no way of explaining himself now. Claude really isn't in the hotel. It looks like my eyes weren't deceiving me at all. It must have been him just now. Irene, I think we'll be able to catch him red-handed if we go in now. Claude is too disgusting to do such a despicable thing as a noble knight. Katie looked angrily at the alleyway when she'd arrived. Irene nodded with a cold face and didn't waste another word. She pulled Katie and rushed into the alleyway. Beecher and the others were afraid that something would happen and followed after a moment of hesitation. When they'd all gone in, Han Sho finally walked unhurriedly towards the entrance of the alleyway with a malicious smile on his face. Chapter 50. Moonlight spilled into the dense forest, and there were only the soft cries of insects in the surroundings. However, with Han Sho's sensitive ears, he could hear Claude's low breathing as he suppressed his anger. "Damned lowly servant pig, who do you think you are to trick me?" Claude's suppressed rage finally exploded as he looked at Han Sho fiercely. His usual sunny demeanor had already disappeared beyond the highest heavens. A barrage of attacks rained down on Han Sho's body. Han Sho covered his head with his hands and didn't make a move to block, forcefully enduring Claude's thunderous rage. He finally curled up and fell to the ground, looking like he couldn't take any more heavy blows. Han Sho, who had been thinking with a wry smile, was caught off guard and stumbled to the left from a slap to the face. It was a good thing that Han Sho's body was far stronger than the average person's, and he steadied himself amidst the chaos. After regaining his footing, he held his cheek and looked at Claude with a wry smile. "Little fellow, what are you doing here?" The skinny mage looked at Han Sho and asked with a slight smile. "All right." Han Sho thought carefully for a moment. He knew that he was in trouble this time, and had already prepared himself to be beaten up by Claude. He followed behind Claude and gradually walked out of the town of Droll, arriving in a dense forest to the southwest of the town. "I'm the son of the chief of the Griffin Legion. You damned errant slave, how dare you hurt me?" Claude's body was in so much pain that it felt like it was going to split open, and he shouted angrily in a weak voice. The old mage nodded and thought for a moment with a frown. He said to the female elven archer beside him, "Blanche, go investigate and see if it's the orcs' wolf riders. Every year when it's almost winter, they always send out wolf riders to plunder the border villages of the Empire. How is it? Painful, isn't it? But I won't let you die so easily. Do you know who I am? I am Claude Asher, the son of the commander of the Griffin Legion, Bob Asher. You damned errant slave, how dare you scheme against me and ruin the good time between me and Irene? I will make you suffer and die slowly, ahaha." Claude viciously stared at Han Sho. He sneered as he drew his long sword and walked towards Han Sho step by step. However, the geography of the town of Droll is special, and there are large numbers of adventurers and mercenaries inside. Over the years, the orcs have never sent wolf riders to attack the town of Droll. Why is it so strange this time, and there's still a long time until winter? Erin's face was full of rage as she glared at Claude and scolded him. She said hatefully, "Claude, you're disgusting. I don't want to see you ever again. Katie, let's go." After Han Sho had walked away, Felix stared oddly at Han Sho's back and thought for a while before murmuring to himself, "I must be overthinking things." There's no way that this kid's senses are stronger than my wind archmage's. Han Sho had thought that he would at most be beaten up by Claude for this kind of prank, but the results now finally made Han Sho realize the cruelty of reality. Not only did Claude want him dead this time, but he also wanted him to die in extreme pain. This was the cruel reality. Because the process of training this magical yuan was often accompanied by unbearable pain, this caused Han Sho's personality to change from the casual attitude of the past to one of unyielding determination. Han Sho had greatly improved both in terms of willpower and endurance towards pain. From the two's cautious attitudes, Han Sho understood that they should have also sensed the abnormalities in the south. After thinking for a moment, Han Sho bowed slightly and responded, "Honored mage, I've separated from my companions. They said that they'll be back in a few days, so I've been waiting here." "Pa!" The sound of footsteps traveled from the distance, coming from the intersection of the town of Droll and the dark forest to the south. From the deep and rhythmic sound of the footsteps landing, Han Sho could determine that it should have come from a type of swift magical beast. These magical beasts were definitely heavier than warhorses, and there should be quite a few of them as well. Now that things had progressed to this point, Han Sho knew that his goals had been achieved and there was no longer any need to stay. When he saw Aaron and Katie quickly walk in his direction, he hurriedly concealed himself and leisurely made his way back to the hotel. "Little fellow, the town of Droll isn't very peaceful. It's late at night, you should go back and rest early. Your companions should be looking for you when they return. There's no need to keep waiting like this." Felix smiled faintly as he looked at Han Sho and advised him in a gentle voice. "Thank you for letting me know the cruelty of reality. It's because of your noble status that I'm not only going to hurt you, I'm going to kill you." His heart trembling, Han Sho had a faint sense of foreboding. Han Sho could feel Claude's repressed anger from his body. Although Claude's gaze was calm when he looked at him, Han Sho could still feel the strong undulations of his emotions from the slight chewing of his teeth. It looked like a beating was inevitable. Han Sho smiled wryly, but he didn't feel that it was too frightening. Han Sho had gotten used to being beaten over the past few days, and Han Sho was well aware of the state of his body. He knew that ordinary beatings wouldn't hurt him at all, so he was quite calm. When Claude wanted to dodge, he suddenly let out a shrill scream. Several steel needles had pierced into the backs of his feet, directly nailing his feet to the ground. A bone-piercing pain came from his lower abdomen. Claude looked down and discovered that there was a dagger in his abdomen. Han Sho was looking at him with a callous and apathetic face, and the look in his eyes was very unfamiliar to Claude. Frowning, Han Sho thought for a while and walked out of the hotel. He slowly walked in the direction of the magical creature's roar, wanting to see just what was going on. As Han Sho made his way back to the hotel, he saw a few people walk out from the nearby taverns and hotels with the same expression of surprise on their faces. They quickly made their way to the South Street. It looked like they'd also sensed the commotion and wanted to see what was going on. "All right, Mr. Felix." The female elven archer named Blanche immediately headed south when she heard Felix's words, floating past Han Sho like a gust of wind. "Brian, I have something to discuss with you. Come with me." On the way back to the hotel, Han Sho ran into Claude on the street leading to the hotel. Claude's face was currently clouded, and he looked to be in a terrible mood. Unknowingly, Han Sho's entire personality and mentality had been constantly changing as he trained in magical yuan. As his strength gradually increased, the previously cowardly and timid Han Sho had undergone tremendous changes. His perception and understanding of things were vastly different from what he'd originally thought. It was only now that Han Sho finally understood that he'd been making a mistake all this time. Whether it was Fitch or Bach, his methods were immensely dangerous. With his status as an errant slave, no matter who killed him, they wouldn't have to bear much risk. Even if Bach killed him, he would at most be reprimanded by the Babylon Academy of Magic and Force and compensated with a few gold coins. First, there was a burst of ear-piercing screams, followed by all sorts of noises coming from a house on the left side of the alley. After a while, a dazed and disheveled Claude was forcibly dragged out by Beecher and the others. "I will cut you into a few pieces, and let you howl in agony as you bleed. You will slowly taste the agony before you die. Remember your identity in your next life. You're just a lowly servant pig. Never try to challenge the temper of those above you." Claude jeered maliciously as the long sword in his hand stabbed towards the chest of Han Sho, who was curled up on the ground and seemed to have lost all ability to resist. Han Sho said these words indifferently, and another steel needle appeared in his right hand amidst Claude's terrified screams. He directly pierced Claude's throat. Staring blankly at Claude, Han Shuo's thoughts raced. At this moment, Han Shuo already understood that his actions in the tavern just now had been too rash and impulsive. After Claude had regained consciousness, he must have noticed the state of his body, and must have guessed that the purple Leylon he'd drunk in the tavern was a problem. Claude wasn't an idiot. There had only been Irene and him at the table at the time, and Irene definitely wouldn't have done such a thing. Thinking back to the waiter's sudden fall, Claude must have already guessed what had happened. It was at this moment that the incessant howls suddenly disappeared. Han Shuo's curled-up body suddenly moved, rolling towards Claude's feet. His speed was so fast that Claude was a bit unprepared. Just as Han Shuo had left the tavern and arrived at the south street of Droll, two figures rushed over with faces full of panic. It was an old, skinny mage, and a female elf archer with sharp ears and green hair. When the two arrived, they took a look at Han Shuo and both had surprised expressions, as if they hadn't thought that Han Shuo would be here. It was also at this moment that Han Shuo truly understood what kind of world this was. Status and class were deep-rooted existences. The enormous difference between the two statuses allowed Claude to kill him without any qualms, and didn't need to bear too much responsibility. Claude had called him to this deserted forest only because he didn't want to ruin his noble status and aura. Even if they were in the busy streets of the town of Droll, no one would find it strange if Claude wanted to kill him. Then I'll be going back first. Han Shuo responded calmly and walked back to the tavern after he'd finished speaking. When he arrived at the tavern, Han Shuo washed up and sat on the bed, starting to train his magical yuan. As the magical yuan opened up his meridians inch by inch, Han Shuo clenched his teeth and experienced the heart-wrenching pain as he circulated his magical yuan over and over again using the opening meridians method. A dull thud suddenly sounded in Han Shuo's heart. Han Shuo suddenly stopped training his magical yuan and held his breath, concentrating his attention. His entire body's functions instantly sank into a state of stillness. Growth always came at a price. Han Shuo lay curled up on the ground, still loudly begging for mercy. His heart, which had originally only had a few evil thoughts, slowly began to turn cold and hard. Chapter 51. This wasn't the first time Han Shuo had killed someone, but compared to killing those forest troll, killing Claude on the spot was a huge blow to Han Shuo's mentality. After all, the forest troll and he weren't of the same race, and they were notorious bandits. Han Shuo felt that killing them was as natural as killing magical beasts. But Claude was completely different from them. Han Shuo had no choice but to kill him, because Han Shuo knew that if Claude didn't die, he wouldn't be able to live in peace in the future. Watching Claude fall limp in a pool of blood, Han Shuo felt a bit numb for a moment. There was a feeling of emptiness in his heart. Han Shuo hadn't hesitated at all when he made his move. It was only now that Claude had died in front of him that Han Shuo felt a sense of nervousness. Claude was a noble, and the youngest son of the commander of the Griffin Legion. If this matter was exposed, only death awaited Han Shuo. Han Shuo stared blankly for a while as he stared at Claude's corpse. His originally panicked gaze became more and more resolute, and more callous. Finally, Han Shuo straightened his clothes and stood up. He walked to Claude's side with a calm expression and rummaged through Claude's clothes. He poured out a few dozen gold coins, a crystal card, and some scraps of medicine from Claude's money pouch. After thinking for a bit, Han Shuo only put away the few dozen gold coins. The crystal card and Claude's other items that could expose the matter were placed on the other side by Han Shuo. As soon as the incantation ended, a little skull holding a bone dagger appeared in front of Han Shuo. Han Shuo found a secluded clearing, and one man and one skeleton wielded the bone dagger, spending a few minutes to dig a deep hole. After burying Claude in the deep pit, Han Sho carefully cleaned up the traces of blood left behind by Claude. Even the traces left by Han Sho when he fell and rolled over were slowly covered up by him. After circling around the dense forest and discovering that there weren't any more traces left, Han Sho didn't return the way he'd come. Instead, he made a detour and dug a deep hole to the north of the town of Droll, burying the other things on Claude's body. Only then did he return to the town of Droll from another street. The reason why he did this was because he wanted to be cautious. On the way to the dense forest with Claude, he didn't attract anyone's attention, and this was all because of Claude's deliberate actions. Now that Han Sho had killed him and carefully buried his corpse, logically speaking, no one should be able to find out. Even if someone unintentionally discovered Claude's body, Han Sho would take everything on his body and create the impression of murder for money. This was a common occurrence in the town of Droll, and should be able to cover up the original cause of death. After Han Sho eliminated this hidden danger, Han Sho hid around the hotel where Irene and the others were staying for 2 days in a row, silently observing the movements of the light major students. He discovered that neither Irene nor Beecher and the others were looking for Claude. It looked like they must have thought that Claude was guilty and left on his own. Only Claude himself knew the condition of his body the best. Under those circumstances, no matter how Claude explained, there probably wouldn't be many who would believe him. Also, based on the time that Claude had found him and his understanding of the hallucinogenic aphrodisiac's effects, Han Sho roughly guessed that Claude would be the first to come for revenge after waking up. He didn't immediately explain anything to Irene, Beecher, and the others. After 2 days of observation, Han Sho saw that Irene and Beecher didn't make any moves to look for Claude, and only cared about spending money to visit all sorts of weapon, armor, and medicine stores. Han Sho slowly relaxed his thoughts. That evening, Han Sho didn't go out again to observe Irene, Beecher, and the others. Instead, he stayed in his room and silently trained his magical yuan, expanding the width and flexibility of the meridians in his body over and over again. Han Sho sat on the edge of his bed, completely naked. Sweat flowed down his forehead and covered Han Sho's entire body. The meridians all over his body pulsed, as if earthworms were swimming continuously on the surface of his body. He looked even more sinister and frightening than the evilest of tattoos. During this process, Han Sho's mind suddenly shook, and his entire being sank into a state of unconsciousness. He forgot himself, forgot all of time, and instantly lost all signs of life like a stone statue. Only a faint black light flowed through the meridians on the surface of his skin. Thud, thud, thud. A series of violent knocks on the door abruptly startled Han Sho awake. When Han Sho awoke, he thought for a moment and understood that he must have fallen into a demonic state again without realizing it. Thud, thud, thud. The knocks on the door continued. Han Sho was a bit angry that someone outside had interrupted his training. He casually wrapped himself in a bathrobe and said impatiently, "Coming, coming." Han Sho was startled when the door opened, and the impatient expression on his face vanished without a trace. He immediately put on a smiling face and chuckled. So it's you guys. I've waited for you for a long time, you're finally back." Fanny and Lisa were a bit haggard outside the door, their hair a bit messy. They were clutching something in their hands and carrying bags on their backs. They looked travel-worn, as if they'd just returned to the town of Droll from the dark forest. "Damn you, Brian! You've returned to the town of Droll long ago and made us worry for a while. Yo, how did you get so much money to live in such an expensive room?" "If it wasn't for the owner's affirmation, I really wouldn't have believed that you were the one living in this room." Fanny's bright eyes swept over Han Sho and she said a bit bitterly, "Brian, what happened after you left that day? You didn't return for 2 days, and I thought something had happened to you." Lisa said, "I got lost after I left, and only discovered that you'd already left when I found the original garrison. I couldn't find you, so I returned to the town of Droll first to wait for you. It's a good thing that nothing happened to everyone, that's great." Han Shuo smiled faintly and explained faintly. Fanny swept a glance over Han Shuo and thought for a moment before speaking to Lisa beside her. Lisa, you and Master Jean and the others prepare the rooms first. I have something to discuss with Brian. Lisa looked a bit suspiciously at Fanny and said, Master Fanny, it's been so long since that incident, and Brian even saved our lives. Do you still want to settle that debt with him? Her face reddening, Fanny couldn't help but say with embarrassment and anger when she heard Lisa mention what had happened last time. No, I'm talking to him about something else. Help me choose a room first, I'll be there in a moment. Lisa still seemed a bit uneasy after hearing Fanny's explanation, but she didn't say anything more and turned to leave, muttering something under her breath. Fanny swept a glance over Han Shuo as soon as Lisa left, and then looked at the room she'd once lived in. Her face grew even redder, and she snorted lightly. Aren't you going to invite me in? Master Fanny, please come in. Han Shuo started and turned to the side in a panic. He stuck his head out to look left and right in the hallway when Fanny came in, and closed the door tightly with a swoosh, as if he had a guilty conscience. What are you sneaking around for? Let me ask you, just what happened after you left the camp that day? How did you get the gold coins to stay in this room? Fanny stared at Han Shuo with a scrutinizing gaze after she'd sat down. Han Shuo was still a bit uneasy after killing Claude, and was a bit surprised when he heard Fanny's question. He smiled lightly and explained after thinking for a while. I left the camp that day and practiced necromancy magic by myself nearby. I ran into an injured windblade wolf and chased after it, killing it when it wasn't paying attention. When I returned to where I was and discovered that you'd already left, I hurried back myself. When I returned to the town of Droll, I sold the windblade wolf's magic core and wolf skin, earning the gold coins. I thought that you'd still be resting in this hotel when you came back, so I rented this room and waited for you. That's what happened. Fanny didn't immediately speak after Han Shuo had finished speaking, but rather looked thoughtfully at Han Shuo. She exclaimed softly after a while, Brian, you're completely different from before. Startled, Han Shuo squeezed out a simple and honest smile and scratched his head. Am I? What's different about me? A lot. Your appearance, build, height, personality, and expressions when you speak are all different from the you I knew before. It looks like you've changed the most after experiencing the trials of the Dark Forest. The students have all changed a bit in the face of the ever-present life and death struggles in the Dark Forest, but I hadn't thought that you'd changed the most. What a surprise! Fanny looked dazedly at Han Shuo and spoke to Han Shuo with a face full of solemnity. Han Shuo understood that his views on things had changed unknowingly as his strength increased and the dangers he'd encountered in this trip to the Dark Forest. After personally killing Claude the day before yesterday, Han Shuo had deeply reflected upon himself and understood the cruelty of this world even more clearly. This had caused his heart to become colder and colder. Master Fanny, you left a note saying that you'd met the two ogres. Did you have any conflict in the end? Han Shuo laughed lightly and didn't explain much, instead asking about what had happened to Fanny and the others. Of course, the two ogres followed us the entire time. They even joined forces with a few forest trolls to attack us afterwards, but we still managed to escape in the end. We only deviated from our original path in order to avoid the ogres and forest troll. That's why we returned to Droll so late. Fanny responded. Nodding, Han Shuo was about to speak when his brow suddenly creased. He abruptly stood up and said with a face full of solemnity, I'm afraid we're in trouble. Attention everyone, the orc wolf riders have appeared to the south of Droll and are on their way here. Everyone prepare for battle. Loud shouts suddenly rang out from the streets outside the hotel. They were all news of the orc wolf riders' impending invasion. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.